Chapter 62. False spirit root, fail. Ordinary spirit root, fail. Superior class spirit root, pass. Everyone walked towards the stone door one after another. However, most of them were blocked outside and could not pass through the stone door. Only those with superior class spirit roots and above could pass the spirit testing stage. In the blink of an eye, there were only dozens of people left. Among them were the arrogant man, the white-bloused woman, Little Fatty and Su Zimo. None of them had a heaven spirit root. There were more than 10 people with earth spirit roots and the rest were all superior class. The two Dao children could not hide their disappointment and could not help but place their hopes on the remaining dozens of people. At that moment, Little Fatty walked towards the stone door with a grin. Just as Little Fatty arrived in front of the stone door, a loud bang came from the stone door. Everyone jumped in fright. Rumble. Boom. The water screen in the middle of the stone door turned yellow and gradually solidified like a sturdy wall made of earth. Earth element, heaven spirit root. Up till now, there was finally a heaven spirit root among the 500 people. The eyes of the two Dao children lit up and they smiled, nodding at Little Fatty in a friendly manner. Little Fatty passed through the stone door with ease and arrived beside the two Dao children with a grin. He held their hands affectionately and started chatting with them as though they were good friends who had not seen each other in years. The two Dao children were a little stunned, they had barely exchanged a few words and they had almost told him about their ancestors. When he saw that, Su Zimo chuckled internally. This Little Fatty was an easygoing person. Even though he looked honest and cute, he was more cunning than anyone else. Before long, the skinny Dao child was the first to react. He coughed gently and shook off Little Fatty's chubby hands, saying in a deep voice, "Fellow Daoist, please respect yourself and wait at the side for a moment. Don't disturb us." "Yes, yes, yes. Respect, respect. I know that I'm serious," Little Fatty chuckled without any hint of awkwardness. The skinny Dao child rolled his eyes and shook off Little Fatty hurriedly. He shouted towards the side of the stone door, "Next." Another person stepped forward and failed. Fewer and fewer people were left on the other side of the stone gate. The arrogant man finally opened his eyes. His gaze shifted to the white-robed woman not far away. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly as he walked towards the stone door. The arrogant man's actions immediately attracted everyone's attention. This person seemed to be born to be a king. His every move would attract the attention of everyone. Little Fatty stopped smiling and looked at the stone door. The woman in white frowned slightly and lifted her head to look at the arrogant man. However, her eyes were still cold. The arrogant man came to the front of the stone door and stood still. The water curtain in the middle of the stone door did not show any color. Hee hee. After a short silence, a burst of laughter came from the crowd. "You don't even have a spirit root, what are you pretending for?" "That's right. I thought it was someone incredible." That's not right. Without spirit root, how did he become a chi refinement warrior?" As soon as he finished speaking, the entire place fell silent. Just now, the people who were laughing at the arrogant man felt as if their throats were being strangled by a pair of invisible hands. They were dumbfounded. The two Dao children had grim expressions. Little Fatty seemed to have thought of something as his rotund body shuddered and he could not conceal the shock in his eyes. Woof! Woof! Right then, a strange sound of wind could be heard in front of the stone door. The water curtain shimmered as though it was being blown by a gentle breeze. Wind attribute. Variant spirit root. The two Dao children exclaimed. When he heard that, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Among the 5 types of spirit roots, the heaven spirit root was the best and rarest. However, the rarest type of spirit root was the variant spirit root, such as wind, thunder, ice, light, darkness and so on. If the heaven spirit root was 1 in 10,000, the variant spirit root was 1 in 100,000. Of course, the variant spirit root was also a type of heaven spirit root. It did not mean that it was stronger than the heaven spirit root of the 5 elements, it was just that it was extremely rare. The arrogant man smiled and passed through the stone door with ease. The skinny Tao child whispered excitedly, "Junior brother, wait here first. I'll report to the peak master and be back soon." All right. Go on, senior brother," the fat Tao child replied hurriedly. Right then, the white-bloused woman outside the stone door moved as well. "Hold on, senior brother. It won't be too late to leave after taking a look at this one," the fat Tao child called the skinny Tao child back. The skinny Tao child nodded and stared fixedly at the white-bloused woman, as though he was even more nervous than her. When the white-bloused woman arrived before the stone door, there was still no color on the water curtain. This time round, no one mocked her anymore. Could it be another variant spirit root? The two Tao children widened their eyes in disbelief. Everyone held their breaths instinctively and stared at the stone door. Crack! 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 Suddenly, the water curtain within the stone door was covered in a layer of frost and turned into ice in the blink of an eye. An ice attribute variant spirit root. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. It's been dozens of years since a variant spirit root has appeared in Misty Peak. Now, there are two of them. No, I've got to report to the peak master. The skinny Tao child summoned a flying sword and sped towards the back of the mountain, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Everyone looked at the haughty man and the white-bloused woman with envy and respect. Little Fatty came before the white-bloused woman with a grin and said in a fawning manner, "Sister, you're so beautiful. I've never seen such a beautiful sister in my entire life. You're even prettier than our village belle, Sister Kaifeng." Everyone was instantly dumbfounded and rolled their eyes. Little Fatty really didn't know how to choose his words. Village belle, Sister Kaifeng. Little Fatty wasn't wrong. The white-bloused woman was indeed extremely beautiful. However, most people wouldn't have the cheek to say something like that, let alone in front of her. However, the strange thing was that when these words came out of Little Fatty's mouth, they sounded very natural and sincere. It didn't feel strange at all. If it was any other woman, they would definitely be embarrassed to hear such blatant praise. However, the white-bloused woman's expression did not change. She merely glared at Little Fatty coldly without saying anything. Little Fatty wasn't discouraged even though he was snubbed. He snuck to the side of the haughty man and said with admiration, "Brother, you've got such a great figure. I'm so envious." Scram! The haughty man opened his mouth and spat out a single word. "All right." Little Fatty nodded his head seriously and started rolling on the ground without a care for the filth. His body was plump to begin with and was round like a ball. Now that he was rolling on the ground, it was hard to tell if he was a ball or a person. The white-bloused woman's lips twitched and the frost in her eyes melted, revealing a faint smile. Little Fatty's eyes were extremely crafty. When he caught sight of that, he scampered to the white-bloused woman's side with a mesmerized expression. His eyes seemed to be sparkling as he praised, "Sister, you're so beautiful when you smile." The smile in the white-bloused woman's eyes disappeared instantly. Instead, she reached out with her fair palm and knocked Little Fatty on the head gently. Little Fatty smiled with a look of enjoyment. To think that there would be such a shameless person in this world. That thought flashed through everyone's minds. The fat child looked at the remaining dozens of people and found nothing out of the ordinary. He waved his hand impatiently and said, "Continue with the test. Hurry up." Su Zimo tidied his clothes and walked forward. Chapter 63. Su Zimo's actions did not attract anyone's attention. Compared to the haughty man, the white-bloused woman and Little Fatty, Su Zimo was way too ordinary and was merely dressed weirdly. The reason why Su Zimo was the last to take the test was not because he wanted to shock the world with a single feat, it was because he did not have a spirit root to begin with. Even though Dai Yu had planted a spirit root in him, he was still a little nervous, afraid that something might happen. Su Zimo stood in front of the stone door and stared fixedly at the water screen before him. Swoosh! The water screen before him flashed with a red light and burst into flames in the blink of an eye, emitting a scorching heat. Su Zimo was elated. Fire attribute, heaven spirit root. Other than the haughty man and the white-bloused woman, everyone else looked over. Among the 500-odd people, other than the two variant spirit roots, Little Fatty was the only one with the earth attribute heaven spirit root. Su Zimo was the second to have the heaven spirit root, and that was rather eye-catching. Furthermore, those with some common cultivation knowledge knew that a fire spirit root was better than an earth spirit root. On the one hand, the fire attribute was the strongest amongst the 5 elements in terms of killing power. On the other hand, having the fire attribute meant that one had a chance of becoming an elixir refinement master or a weapon refinement master. That was because those two types of cultivators had extremely high requirements in terms of control, understanding, and cultivation of fire. Therefore, cultivators with fire spirit roots had an innate advantage. Little Fatty stood by the stone gate, eager to try and strike up a conversation with Su Zimo after he passed through the stone gate so that he could get familiar with him. When the fat child who was initially bored saw this, he could not help but exclaim softly. Smiling, he nodded. Not bad, not bad. Come on over, young master. After all, the fat child was not too surprised when he saw the fire spirit root after the two variant spirit roots appeared consecutively. At that moment, no one noticed Su Zimo's abnormality. Su Zimo stood motionlessly in front of the stone door and did not pass through immediately. It was not that he did not want to, but the stone door did not allow him to. Su Zimo felt an immense resistance that wanted to keep him outside the door. Logically speaking, the water screen in the middle of the stone door would only block those with no, pseudo and ordinary spirit roots. However, even though Su Zimo clearly had a heaven spirit root, the scarlet water screen blocked him. If not for the fact that Su Zimo's physique was strong, he would have been sent flying by the water screen like the first Chi refinement warrior. How could this be? As Su Zimo resisted the resistance, he tried to think of a countermeasure. No one knew his background better than Su Zimo. To begin with, he was without a spirit root. In that case, it was because it was blocked. But what was going on with the fire spiritual root before his eyes? If this stalemate were to continue, everyone else would notice that something was amiss, let alone the fat child of Ethereal sect, and Su Zimo's trip would be for naught. Not take it. Su Zimo was indignant. Why? He had already come this far. How could he still be blocked by a stone door? With a dark expression, Su Zimo took a step towards the water screen in front of him. With that step, Su Zimo had already executed the stance of the plow heaven stride. His aura surged and he exuded a murderous aura. Even the fat child beside the stone door was shocked. The arrogant man seemed to have sensed something. He opened his eyes and looked towards the stone door. The white-bloused woman also glanced sideways and frowned slightly. The next moment, everyone discovered an extremely strange scene. Su Zimo had almost passed through the stone door. However, the scarlet water screen did not dissipate. It was like a layer of elastic gauze that wrapped around his body tightly, as though it was trying its best to block him. Everyone present was dumbfounded. What was going on? Fire element, heaven spirit root. That was right. However, why would the stone door block this person? Su Zimo was wrestling with the scarlet water screen in the middle of the stone door. All of a sudden, Su Zimo narrowed his eyes and a series of crackling sounds could be heard from his body. His body seemed to have expanded slightly as his tendons and bones sounded at the same time. With a soft holler, he took another step forward. Splash! The water screen shattered and scattered all over the ground. After successfully passing through the stone door, Su Zimo's expression relaxed. He heaved a sigh of relief and came to the side of the fat child. Su Zimo was about to speak when he noticed the strange look in the fat child's eyes as he stared at something behind him. Snap! Right then, a sound came from behind Su Zimo. Su Zimo turned back instinctively. Strangely, a crack had appeared on the beam of the stone gate that was 30 feet tall. Crack! Crack! Before anyone could react, the crack spread rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it covered the entire stone door. It was a frightening sight. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Rumble. Boom. Accompanied by a deafening sound, the stone door collapsed right in front of everyone, turning into a pile of rubble that sent dust flying everywhere. After the deafening sound, there was a dead silence. Everyone's expressions froze. The haughty man frowned. A look of surprise flashed through the eyes of the white-bloused woman as well. Her mouth was slightly agape and she lost her composure. Little Fatty was so shocked that his eyeballs nearly popped out. Explode, explode, explode. The fat child was completely dumbfounded. His eyes were lost and his mind was blank. It was already shocking enough that he had a mutated spirit root. Even his senior brother had run to the back to inform the Peak Master. What was the meaning of this green-robed scholar before him? To think that he would cause the stone door to explode just for a spirit root test. Feeling guilty, Su Zimo coughed gently and revealed a friendly smile. He looked at the fat child and asked, "Fellow Taoist, this stone door must be quite old, right?" "Ah, that's right," the fat child replied instinctively, "it's been a few thousand years." "That's it." Su Zimo nodded and said with a stern expression, "The stone door has been exposed to the elements for a long time and has not been maintained for a long time. It's only natural that there would be some problems. Unfortunately, I caught up with you." "Ah." The fat child's mouth was agape and his jaw almost dropped to the ground. Su Zimo patted the fat child on the shoulder and said earnestly, "Actually, this isn't a bad thing. At the very least, it can remind your sect to take care of some of the old buildings in the sect regularly so that a situation like this doesn't happen again. It's better to be prepared for a rainy day." The fat child did not understand to begin with and his mind was in a mess. When he heard Su Zimo's words, he was even more confused and almost believed it. In reality, this stone door was originally a gigantic spirit testing stone. The cultivators of Ethereal sect dug out the middle of the stone and placed it here, resulting in the stone door before them. The spirit testing stone was a spirit item of the universe and was extremely sensitive towards spirit roots. There was no way it would be destroyed just because it had not been maintained for a long time. If no one had destroyed it, it wouldn't have been an issue for tens of thousands of years, let alone a few thousand years. Little Fatty's eyes darted around and he was the first to react as he secretly gave Su Zimo a thumbs up. Little Fatty felt that he had yet to reach the level where Su Zimo could spout nonsense with such a straight face and could not help but admire him. Su Zimo lamented internally. The situation before him was truly out of his expectations. Just now, his words seemed like he was trying to fool a child. However, it was still better than having his background exposed. Chapter 64. The fat child was dazed by Su Zimo's words and stood rooted to the ground for a long time. Unable to make sense of it, he pointed at Su Zimo and stammered, Why you? I'll report to the Peak Master as well." The fat child shook his head, as though trying to clear his head. Slapping his storage bag, he summoned his flying sword and darted towards the back of the mountain. In the blink of an eye, the two children guarding the place had run away. The fat Tao child was flustered and left in a hurry without leaving any instructions. Little Fatty seemed to be very interested in Su Zimo as he scurried over with glowing eyes. Raising his head, he asked, "Bro, how did you do it? Can you teach me?" Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he shook his head. "That shouldn't have anything to do with me." Even though he said that, Su Zimo was grumbling in his heart. There were only two reasons why the stone door had stopped him. Firstly, it was because he did not have a spirit root to begin with. Secondly, even though they both had heaven spirit roots, the fire spirit root that Da Yu planted in him was different from normal ones. Su Zimo could not explain which reason it was. After the spirit testing stage, there were only 80 people left out of the 500, with more than 20 of them being Qi refinement warriors. According to the normal order, the remaining 80 people should have followed the path behind the stone door towards the peak of the mountain for the third stage, the life and death stage. However, the two children of Ethereal sect had already run to the back of the mountain. Everyone stood where they were without a choice, not knowing if they should continue up the mountain or wait where they were. Right then, the haughty man smiled and led the way up the mountain. The moment he moved, the others were eager to give it a try as well. The two Taoist children had said that the third stage was nothing more than following the mountain path and climbing to the peak. However, everyone had their own plans. If they could be the first to reach the peak, their chances of entering the sect would be much higher. After the haughty man, the white-bloused woman moved as well. Everyone looked at each other and followed closely behind him. The mountain path was paved with bluestone. It was neither rugged nor bumpy. The scenery along the way was pleasant. Ancient trees stood tall with luxuriant foliage, and the chirping of birds was pleasant to the ear. Looking at the surrounding scenery and traveling through the clouds, Xiaochen felt like he was in an immortal realm. He felt relaxed and happy. It did not feel like a life-and-death situation at all. Su Zimo was not in a hurry. He followed behind the crowd. From Su Zimo's point of view, since the ethereal sect had set up this hurdle, it would definitely not be that whoever reached the peak first would have the advantage. Firstly, it was too vulgar. Secondly, it was unfair to all the mortals present. Thirdly, if it was so simple, it wouldn't be called a trial of life and death. Little Fatty was originally circling around the arrogant man and the white-robed woman. Ever since Su Zimo tested his spirit roots and caused the stone door to explode, Little Fatty had been following behind Su Zimo. Along the way, his little mouth had not stopped moving. Worried that his background would be exposed, Su Zimo was a little distracted and would only reply occasionally. Bro, other people test their spirit roots and it's all normal. But your spirit root test is good. It's like a local god farting. Why do you say that? It's extraordinary. Bro, you have a dignified appearance and an extraordinary aura. Your background must not be simple, right? I studied for a few years in the past. Bro, you're practically farting in your bed. You're both literate, smelling, and martial, covering. Su Zimo finally understood Little Fatty's capabilities. He hurriedly took a few steps forward, wanting to squeeze into the crowd. Right then, the crowd at the front suddenly stopped in their tracks. Su Zimo raised his head and frowned. The mountain path had come to an end. In front of everyone stood a steep cliff that pierced through the clouds. The top was shrouded in clouds and they could not see the end of it. The true test was here. Just now, the flat mountain path was just a cushion. The many mortals present looked at the mountain peak with grim expressions. To them, the only way to reach the peak was to climb with their bare hands. However, the mountain peak was way too steep and there was almost no space to stand on. On both sides of the mountain path was a bottomless abyss. If they lost their footing, they would definitely fall to their deaths. Everyone could not help but recall what the two Dao children said previously. This stage was extremely dangerous. If they were not careful, they would fall into the bottomless abyss and die without a corpse. They had to be careful and not force it. Many mortals revealed timid expressions as they began to think of retreating. Some of them were indignant and discussed softly. This ethereal sect is too much. It's just joining a sect. There's no need for us to risk our lives. That's right. Our spirit roots are not bad either. If we really can't do it, we can just join other sections. It's better than falling to our deaths. I wonder how high this mountain peak is. What if we run out of stamina halfway? Unlike most mortals, the 20-odd Qi refinement warriors present looked relaxed. To mortals, this mountain peak was unreachable. However, to them, it was nothing more than riding on their flying swords and rising into the air. One of the Qi refinement warriors withdrew a flying sword from his storage bag and leaped up. Waving his robes, he looked suave as he chuckled. I'll make a move first. I'll wait for everyone at the peak. With that, he soared into the air and disappeared into the clouds in the blink of an eye. The other Qi refinement warriors did not want to be left behind as they summoned their spirit weapons and flew towards the peak. The strange thing was that the arrogant man did not move. Instead, he frowned slightly and looked into the depths of the clouds. No one knew what he was thinking about. It was the same for the white-bloused woman as she stood on the spot, deep in thought. A few mortals mustered their courage and began to climb towards the peak as well. Compared to the Chi refinement warriors, these mortals were much slower and every step was treacherous. If they missed a step, they would fall into the bottomless abyss. "Bro, aren't you moving?" Little Fatty looked at Su Zimo and asked. Su Zimo was about to speak when he heard a tragic cry from the clouds. "Ah!" Everyone's hearts skipped a beat. In the blink of an eye, a figure fell from the clouds above. It streaked across everyone's eyes and fell into the dark abyss beside them. At the sight of that, everyone's expressions changed drastically. They felt chills down their spines and goosebumps all over their bodies. The person who fell into the abyss was the Chi refinement warrior who had set off first. The Chi refinement warrior was dead? What had that person encountered above? The clouds above were tumbling and changing unpredictably, emitting a chilling killing intent. "Ah!" There was another tragic cry. A figure streaked across and disappeared into the abyss on both sides of the mountain path. Gulp, gulp. The sound of saliva being swallowed could be heard from the crowd. Within this short period of time, 2 Chi refinement warriors had already died in the bottomless abyss. The 2 Dao children were right. The third round was fair to everyone. Even Chi refinement warriors might not be able to reach the peak. Some of the mortals who had just set off and did not climb too high were hanging on the mountain walls. At the sight of that, their faces turned pale and they were drenched in sweat. Someone had already started to climb down the mountain walls. What a joke! Even the Chi refinement warriors were dead. There was no need for them to take this risk. Suddenly, the arrogant man smiled and muttered to himself, "Life and death round, life and death round. Life at the peak of the mountain and death at the foot of the mountain. It's either life or death. Interesting. There's a challenge." Chapter 65. Many people looked at the haughty man with a different expression. Everyone was so scared that their faces were drained of color and they had thoughts of retreating. Only the haughty man was not afraid. Instead, there was a look of eagerness in his eyes. "Ah! Ah!" There was another series of tragic cries. The Chi refinement warriors who were the first to move fell from the clouds one after another. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the bottomless abyss on both sides of the mountain path. At the sight of this, someone finally could not take it anymore and started to turn back. Little Fatty was secretly shocked and exclaimed, "Just now, a level 9 Chi refinement warrior has fallen." What exactly did they encounter above the clouds? Su Zimo looked even more closely. Just now, a total of 23 Chi refinement warriors had soared into the sky. In just a short while, all of them had fallen and none of them were spared. This was a little terrifying. The many mortals who retreated from the mountain wall were so scared that their faces turned pale. Their hearts were still pounding and their limbs were trembling. They went down the mountain without even turning back. There was a total of more than 80 people who passed the second stage. Now that 23 Chi refinement warriors had failed and more than half of the mortals had retreated, there were only 17 people left standing at the foot of the mountain. These 17 people were all strong-willed people. Even when they saw many Chi refinement warriors falling one after another, there was no fear in their eyes. Little Fatty had been making jokes and laughing along the way. However, at this moment, he was quiet and his little eyes were darting around. No one knew what he was thinking about. Su Zimo had a feeling that this life and death stage was a little unusual. There was a hint of strangeness in every aspect. However, Su Zimo could not pinpoint exactly what was wrong. Almost at the same time, the haughty man and the white-bloused lady took out their flying swords and soared into the sky. However, their speed was obviously reduced. It was clear that the two of them were extremely cautious and did not dare to be careless. "Brother, be careful. I'll go up and scout for you first." Little Fatty was also a Chi refinement warrior. He took out a small shield from the storage bag at his waist. It opened in the wind and expanded rapidly, lifting his fat body up slowly. The remaining 14 people, including Su Zimo, were all mortals without spirit chi. If one wanted to reach the top of the mountain, they could only use their hands and feet to climb bit by bit. Su Zimo no longer hesitated. He arrived at the foot of the mountain wall and leaped up. He was light and agile as he directly hung on the mountain wall. Then, he climbed up quickly. The remaining 13 mortals were dumbfounded. They almost thought that it wasn't a human that had gone up, but a monkey. Now that Su Zimo's tendon's transformation chapter was nearing completion, he was as agile as a python, as nimble as an ape, as swift as the wind, and as swift as an arrow. To him, the mountain peak before him was not an obstacle at all. Apes were born with the spirit of climbing mountains and the skill of climbing rocks. If Su Zimo gave it his all, even if a chi refinement warrior rode on a flying sword and soared into the sky, his speed might not be faster than him. Back then at the Lang mountain range, Elder Qian of the Joyful clan leaped into the air while Su Zimo climbed up the towering ancient tree. Both of their speeds were almost the same. Of course, at that time, Su Zimo had used the sanguine ape transformation, while Elder Qian was a foundation establishment cultivator. Even though Su Zimo did not use his full strength, it did not take long for him to leave the remaining 13 mortals far behind him. Caw, caw. Right then, Su Zimo's ears twitched and he could vaguely hear a series of bird cries. After living in the Lang mountain range for a year, although Su Zimo was still unable to understand the language of birds and beasts, he could more or less understand the emotions in their cries. The series of bird cries clearly had a hint of excitement and mockery. Why is there a spirit beast? Su Zimo frowned slightly. However, he did not reduce his speed and continued to climb upwards. Bastard, how dare you! Not long after, the arrogant man's angry rebuke sounded from above. Su Zimo raised his head and looked up with narrowed eyes. In the depths of the clouds, a gigantic bird spread its wings and cried into the air. Its body was faintly discernible as it attacked the arrogant man, the white-bloused woman and little fatty continuously in midair. A gentle flap of the bird's wings would cause a strong gust of wind. Little fatty and the other two swayed in midair, as though they could fall at any moment. A spirit demon? Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. The bird gave off an aura that was no different from a spirit demon. It seemed to have just entered the spirit demon realm not long ago and was equivalent to an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator. Even so, the strength of the bird was enough to crush little fatty and the other two. It was clear that the bird was not using its full strength. Like a cat chasing a mouse, it circled above the three of them and flapped its wings occasionally. Little fatty and the other two could not continue ascending. The arrogant man had a wind spirit root to begin with. Although he was swaying in the strong winds, he could still maintain his balance. The white-bloused woman had a cold expression and a crystalline ice barrier appeared around her. It was clear that she had already used a talisman. Little fatty relied on the wide and stable shield and sprawled on it. He gripped the edge of the shield tightly with both hands and his chubby face was covered in sweat with a frantic gaze. So, this is the obstacle of the life and death juncture. We can only reach the peak by passing through the obstruction of this bird. Su Zimo pondered for a moment and understood the reason behind it. Just as he was about to continue climbing, little fatty's exclamation sounded from above. Perhaps because the bird saw that Su Zimo and the others had climbed up as well, it did not want to continue fighting with little fatty and the other two. It flapped its wings furiously and a strong gust of wind howled. Little fatty was the first to give in and fell from midair. Even his shield was blown away and nowhere to be found. Ah, 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 ah. Little fatty was so scared that his face turned pale. He bared his fangs and brandished his claws as he screamed. When he saw Su Zimo from above, he quickly said, "Big brother, run. There's a big bird up there and it's very fierce." The direction in which little fatty fell was not far from Su Zimo. Su Zimo had a good impression of little fatty and could not leave him in the lurch. Hence, he moved his body and kept moving horizontally along the mountain wall. He pulled little fatty from midair. Little Fatty rolled his eyes and drooled. He seemed to have fainted from fright and was unconscious. Su Zimo frowned. He was already halfway up the mountain. If he wanted to put Little Fatty down, it would take some effort. Even though Little Fatty was heavy, he was nothing compared to the cold moon saber on Su Zimo's waist and the sanguine crystal bow on his back. At that thought, Su Zimo dragged Little Fatty with one hand and continued climbing with both feet and one hand. His speed did not decrease at all. Su Zimo could finally see it clearly when he got closer. It was an immortal crane that did not look old and was still in its infancy. However, its eyes were filled with excitement. It was as if shooting down the climbers was the most fun and interesting game for it. The immortal crane swooped down and extended its claws, landing on the white-bloused woman's talisman ice shield. Crack, crack. The ice shield shattered and was easily torn apart by the immortal crane's claws. A gust of wind blew and the white-bloused woman fell from the flying sword. Although her eyes were dim, she did not make a sound and fell into the abyss in the blink of an eye. The haughty man followed closely behind. Under the attack of the immortal crane, he could not last more than 3 breaths and fell from midair with an indignant look on his face. Caw, caw. The immortal crane raised its head and cried, looking pleased. Chapter 66. Su Zimo no longer had any doubts when he saw how the haughty man and white-bloused woman had fallen into the bottomless abyss. There was no way anyone who fell into the abyss would die. The fact that the two of them possessed mutated spirit roots had already alerted the Peak Master of Misty Peak. How could they die so easily? However, Su Zimo did not know what would happen to those who fell into the abyss. Su Zimo shifted horizontally, avoiding the crane's line of sight as he sped towards the peak. Even though he only had one hand, Su Zimo's toes were as nimble as his fingers after removing his shoes. Digging into the walls of the mountain, he climbed upwards rapidly. The crane was extremely sensitive as it circled in midair and arrived above Su Zimo's head. It cried out twice with a mocking look in its eyes, as though it was mocking Su Zimo's cleverness. The man and crane finally met. On the other side, there were 2 middle-aged Taoist priests sitting opposite each other on the summit of a mountain. Both of them were dressed in white robes. However, one of them had a flying sword embroidered on his cuff, while the other had a hexagonal symbol embroidered on his cuff. Both of them sipped their tea leisurely. Beside the 2 middle-aged priests stood a skinny child who seemed to be saying something with an agitated expression. Mutated spirit roots? And there are 2 of them? One of the middle-aged Taoist priest's expression changed slightly as he put down his teacup and asked. The skinny child nodded hurriedly. The other middle-aged Taoist priest asked, "What are their spirit roots?" The skinny child replied, "One of them is a wind spirit root while the other is an ice spirit root." When they heard that, the 2 middle-aged Taoist priests exchanged glances and smiled, seemingly satisfied. When Xian, Spirit Peak is going to have 2 more geniuses. Misty Peak had 6 peaks. The tallest one in the middle was the true Misty Peak that could be seen from the outside. Misty Peak was surrounded by 5 other peaks: Spirit Peak, Elixir Peak, Talisman Peak, Array Peak and Weapon Peak. The Taoist priest called Wen Xian was the one with the flying sword embroidered on his sleeve. He was the Peak Master of Spirit Peak. The other was Xian Yi, the Peak Master of Array Peak. Anyone who could become the Peak Masters of the 5 peaks was definitely a perfected Jin Dan. Even though the 5 peaks had their own strengths, Spirit Peak was the leader with the most disciples. Spirit Peak valued cultivation realm and everything they taught was about killing techniques of cultivators. If a mutated or heaven spirit root were to appear, they would be chosen by Spirit Peak. Standing, Wen Xian smiled. "I'll go take a look. Let's see how many trims those 2 fellas will survive." Don't worry, people with mutated spiritual roots are blessed with luck. They will definitely be able to survive the 2 tribulations. A mocking look flashed through the eyes of Array Peak's master, Xian Yi, as he teased, "Look at how anxious you are. Even as a Peak Master, you can't hold it in anymore. Let's go take a look." When Xian laughed loudly and pulled Xian Yi's wrist, wanting to leave together. Xian Yi shook his head and quickly retreated. He smiled, I'm not going. Seeing such a good seedling being taken in by Spirit Peak, I'm just asking for trouble. Right then, a chubby child arrived on his flying sword, panting heavily. Peak Master. And no. This is bad. The two Peak Masters glanced at each other in surprise. Junior brother, why are you here as well? The skinny child walked up and asked. The chubby child was sweating profusely as he waved his chubby hands. Peak Master, the spirit testing gate exploded. Exploded? Wen Xian and Xian Yi exchanged glances in confusion. Wen Xian asked, why did the spirit testing gate explode? Did someone destroy it? No. The chubby child shook his head before nodding. Yes. No. The two Peak Masters were confused by the chubby child. What's going on? Speak properly. Wen Xian pulled a long face and hollered. In the mind of the fat Dao child, he could not help but recall the words of the green-robed scholar. Subconsciously, he imitated the words and said with a serious face, perhaps the spirit testing gate has been exposed to the elements for a long time and has not been maintained for a long time, causing it to break down. Bam! Wen Xian extended his finger and flicked the chubby child on the head. Ow! The chubby child clutched his head and pouted his lips, looking aggrieved. What a load of nonsense! Xian Yi could not help but chuckle. Who taught you that? You can't say it yourself, can you? There was a scholar who said so. The chubby child continued, however, I feel that he made sense. He even kindly told me to take note of the sect in the future to take care of some of the ancient buildings, lest, bam. It was another flick. A huge red bump appeared on the chubby child's head. The chubby child was about to cry from the slap as he asked with watery eyes, Peak Master, why are you always hitting me? Child, you're way too dumb. Even if you're sold off in the future, you'll still have to count the money for them. Xian Yi did not know to laugh or to cry. Wen Xian said in a deep voice, tell me the entire story. Don't hide anything. There was a scholar with a bow and saber. He came to the spirit testing gate and it showed that he had a fire spirit root, the chubby child said. Continue. However, the spirit testing gate refused to let him in and the scholar barged in. Thereafter, the spirit testing gate exploded. When Xian and Xian Yi frowned and exchanged glances, they still did not understand. When Xian pressed on, are you sure it's a fire spirit root? That's right. The chubby child explained hurriedly, Peak Master, you've got to believe me. Even though I'm a little dumb, I can tell that it's a fire spirit root. That's strange, Xian Yi was perplexed. After pondering for a moment, Xian Yi said, When Xian, I'll go with you to check out the background of that scholar. Without using any spirit weapons, the two of them soared into the air and sped towards the front of the mountain with the chubby and skinny children. Before long, the four of them arrived at the location of the spirit testing gate. It's indeed shattered. Xian Yi looked at the broken spirit testing gate beneath his feet and murmured softly. When Xian asked, where is that scholar? He's gone, the chubby child looked around. Suddenly, Xian Yi said, that's not right. They've already ascended the mountain and the 8 distresses formation in the abyss has already been activated. Yes, the two fellas with the variant spirit roots are inside as well. When Xian asked hurriedly, how is it? How many tribulations have those two survived? Life and death tribulations. You can rest assured now, Xian Yi smiled. Pausing for a moment, Xian Yi shook his head. There's no bow-wielding scholar in the 8 distresses formation. He must have left long ago because he was afraid. When Xian harumphed softly. I don't know where this lad came from. He destroyed our ethereal sect spirit testing gate and left just like that. How insolent. Caw, caw. Right then, 2 hurried cries of cranes sounded from the clouds far away. When Xian and Xian Yi turned towards the sound. On a mountain peak far away, a figure was agile and light, twisting and turning on the precipitous cliff without falling. While avoiding the attacks of the cranes, he still had the strength to climb towards the peak. There was still some distance to the peak, and even with perfected being Jean Dan's vision, he could not see clearly in the clouds. Xian Yi, look! There's a monkey over there. Wen Xian pointed to the black figure on the mountain peak. Chapter 67. When he heard that, Xian Yi chuckled. Fufu, our Misty Peak is one of the 5 major sects of the Great Zhou dynasty after all. It's a rare paradise as well. That monkey sure is smart to know to head up the mountain to learn from a master. Yes, that monkey's movement technique is not bad. I wonder how long he can last against Little Crane's attacks. Judging from Little Crane's cries, she's a little angry, huh? That monkey is in for it. Let's go and take a look. Wen Xian and Xian Yi smiled with relaxed expressions. Each of them carried a child and soared into the air, speeding towards the peak in the distance. They were getting closer. After breaking through the thick fog, the smiles on Wen Xian and Xian Yi's faces gradually disappeared. Their gazes were strange, as though they had witnessed something unbelievable. After a momentary silence. Cough, that black shadow, doesn't seem like a monkey. Xian Yi pointed at the black shadow that was still climbing the peak and coughed with a hesitant tone. Yes, it seems like a person, Wen Xian chuckled dryly with an awkward expression. As peak masters, both of them could not help but feel embarrassed for committing such a low-level mistake. In reality, they could not be blamed for that. From afar, the black shadow on the peak was blurry, darting left and right as though it was even more agile than a monkey. Even though both of them were perfected Jean Dan and were knowledgeable, they had not expected that black shadow to be a person. When they got closer, their expressions changed once more. That doesn't seem like a person. Yes, there should be 2 of them. After another momentary silence, Wen Xian's expression darkened and he could not help but grumble, is there something wrong with that person? It's fine if he's climbing the mountain, but what's with that little fatty? That's not right. That person is carrying a bow and saber. I seem to have heard of that before, suddenly, Xian Yi remarked. Right then, the fat child beside Wen Xian shouted excitedly as he pointed at the figure scurrying up and down the cliff, Peak Master, that's him. That scholar. On the steep peak. Each time the crane flapped its wings, Su Zimo would stick tightly to the stone wall and dig his fingers and feet deep into the rock. Under Su Zimo's fingers, the tough rock was as soft as tofu. If other mortals wanted to climb the peak, they would have to find a place to rest. But Su Zimo did not have to do that. If not for the crane's obstruction, Su Zimo would have been able to climb on the peak as though it was flat ground. Right now, many of the mortals behind Su Zimo had already been blown away by the wind created by the wings of the immortal crane, leaving Su Zimo the only one still climbing the mountain. To be precise, there were 2 of them. Su Zimo was even holding on to a little fatty. The crane's eyes shone with a hint of anger as it cried out and soared into the skies. Swooping down, it extended its sharp claws and swiped at Su Zimo. Swoosh! Su Zimo wanted to dodge, but it was too late. In a flash, Su Zimo suddenly let go of his grip and fell half a foot. He then reached out and dug his palms into the stone wall. Snap! Above Su Zimo's head, a large piece of rock was crushed by the crane's claws. Gravel flew everywhere and landed on Su Zimo's face, but he did not notice it at all. Some of the gravel landed on little fatty's body, causing him to shudder visibly. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Suddenly, he hoisted little fatty in the air and hollered, "Don't play dead or I'll throw you down." Little fatty shuddered and opened his eyes, saying hurriedly, "Bro, don't scare me. I was wrong. Do you still want to climb the mountain?" Su Zimo asked hurriedly. "Yes, of course. Lie on my back. Hold on tight. Don't blame me if you fall." All right. Little fatty moved a little and wrapped his arms and legs around Su Zimo's neck and waist like an octopus. That way, even though Su Zimo was still carrying someone, he had an empty hand. The crane's initial attack was not fierce and its intention did not seem to be to hurt anyone. Instead, it was to stop Su Zimo from climbing the mountain. After its repeated futile attacks, the crane was enraged. Just now, if Su Zimo could not dodge in time, his head might be crushed by the crane's claws. Against an enraged early-stage Foundation establishment spirit demon, Su Zimo did not dare to be careless. That was why he had little Fatty lie on his back so that he could use both hands to deal with the crane. To be fair, Su Zimo, who had only cultivated to the third section of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, was not a match for a spirit demon, even if the crane was only at early-stage Foundation establishment. However, Su Zimo did not want to fight the crane. Instead, he wanted to avoid the crane's interception and ascend the mountain. That way, it would be much easier. Swoosh! The crane swooped down once more. Su Zimo's eyes lit up and he exerted strength in his legs, shifting horizontally on the steep and slippery mountain walls. Dodging the crane's attacks, he exerted strength in his entire body and dashed upwards. Crack! 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 Su Zimo's fingers and toes dug into the rocks as he climbed the mountain at a speed comparable to running on the ground. Caw, caw! When the crane saw that, it was enraged and soared into the air at an extremely fast speed. Like a sharp arrow, it arrived behind Su Zimo and attacked repeatedly with its sharp claws and beak. Its long and thin beak was even sharper than a flying sword. With every stab, Su Zimo would hear the sound of the wind, causing him to shudder in fear. As long as he was struck by the sharp beak, there would be a bloody hole in his body. Little Fatty was so scared that he shut his eyes tightly and shivered. Su Zimo dodged repeatedly. His tendons and bones sounded at the same time, stretching and shrinking his body. His flesh was filled and his tendons were trembling continuously, he was almost at his limits. With his spirit perception, Su Zimo avoided the crane's attacks by the skin of his teeth and continued climbing. The crane's cries turned more hurried and even carried a hint of killing intent. The peak was getting closer. The crane's attacks were getting more ferocious as well. At the peak of the mountain, two young Dao children watched everything as though they were in the situation. They looked nervous and could not help but break out in cold sweat for the green-robed scholar. A man and a crane were wrestling on the steep mountain peak. Even though one of them looked like he could not retaliate, it was extremely intense and dangerous. If the green-robed scholar was slightly slower, he could have died under the crane's sharp claws. Wen Xian and Xian Yi had grim expressions as well. They watched everything intently and were prepared to save him at any moment. To think that the scholar would still have some strength left. Even after emptying his hands, he can still climb towards the peak despite little crane's attacks. Xian Yi's tone was emotional. When Xian said in a deep voice, "If I'm not wrong, the saber on the scholar's waist and the bow on his back are both made from spiritual items of the universe. Even though they are pseudo-spirit weapons, the total weight of these two pseudo-spirit weapons is almost 1,000 kilograms." The meaning behind Wen Xian's words was clear. If Su Zimo had removed his cold moon saber and sanguine crystal bow, he would have been able to reach the peak with more agility and speed. Wen Xian and Xian Yi exchanged glances. Both of them had a tacit understanding and the same thought flashed through their minds at the same time. This scholar is interesting. Chapter 68. How did that lad cultivate his physique? With such flexibility, coordination, and extensibility, even spirit beasts are far inferior to them. His movement technique is similar to an ape and python, but there are many differences. He must have learned it from observing wild beasts. Seems like he's rather perceptive. I wonder how many tribulations of the 8 distresses formation he can survive. At that point, Wen Xian and Xian Yi suddenly paused and their expressions changed. Wen Xian murmured softly, "The 8 distresses formation is set in the abyss at the foot of the mountain." If that lad truly ascends to the peak, wouldn't he have avoided the 8 distresses formation's trial? On the surface, Ethereal Sect's third life and death trial was for cultivators to ascend the mountain. However, in reality, it was to set up obstacles at the waist of the mountain and send everyone to the bottom of the mountain to enter the 8 distresses formation. That was the reason why the fat child almost spilled the beans. That was because no one would be able to ascend the peak. Only those who survived the life and death tribulations of the 8 distresses formation would be sent to the peak and officially join the sect. If they could not survive the life and death tribulations, they would be sent outside and would not be able to join Ethereal sect. Those cultivators did not know what was going on and merely thought that they were lucky to have escaped with their lives. The 8 distresses formation was a type of illusion formation and had a total of 8 tribulations: life tribulation, old tribulation, illness tribulation, death tribulation, hatred meeting tribulation, parting love tribulation, unattainable desire tribulation, and 5 skandhas tribulation. There were 2 reasons why they went through so much trouble to get everyone to ascend the mountain before being sent down. Firstly, the mountain peak was steep and those who were timid and had weak wills would leave on their own. Seeking the Tao was a heaven-defying act and was extremely difficult. Even with great determination and fearlessness, one might not be able to reach the end, let alone those who were afraid. Secondly, if they were to enter the 8 distresses formation directly, everyone would be prepared and it would be difficult for them to be confused by the illusions of the 8 distresses formation and the true effects would not be achieved. In the cultivation world, be it illusions or formations, there were obvious flaws. As long as one's mind was clear and their minds were firm, it would be difficult for them to be confused. However, they were sent down suddenly after they were sent up the mountain. Everyone was unprepared and fall into the abyss of the 8 distresses formation as their minds crumbled the moment of death arrive. At this moment, everyone thought that they were already dead. Naturally, they entered the illusory realm and experienced the calamity of death. After surviving the death tribulation and the life tribulation, it would be equivalent to passing the 3rd test of the Ethereal sect and one would be able to officially join the sect. Of course, the 8 distresses formation had a total of 8 tribulations. The more tribulations one could survive, the better. This was not only a test, but also a baptism of the soul. This was because everyone had to experience the pain of the 8 distresses in their life. Even cultivators couldn't avoid it. Now, there was a problem. If Su Zimo ascended the mountain peak, the Ethereal sect's 3rd stage would become a mere decoration. When Xian pondered for a moment before saying, "I'll make a move secretly and knock him down. We can't break the rules of the sect and take him in without passing through the 3rd stage." Xian Yi shook his head and smiled. "Don't worry about it. I'm just curious if he can reach the top of the mountain with his own strength." Pausing for a moment, Xian Yi's eyes shone brightly as he said in a deep voice, "If that lad truly ascends, I'll set up the formation for him personally and let him have a taste of the 8 distresses formation." As the peak master of Array Peak, the 8 distresses formation in the abyss was his masterpiece. Now that a peak master had declared that he was going to set up the formation for an unknown scholar, this was an unprecedented treatment in the history of Ethereal sect. On the stone wall, a man and a crane were still circling around. Su Zimo was already drenched in sweat. However, his eyes were still bright and filled with endless fighting spirit. Initially, little Fatty's eyes were still tightly shut and his face was pale from fright. But now, he was filled with excitement as he sprawled on Su Zimo's back, roaring from time to time to provoke the crane. Caw, caw. Even after using everything it had, the crane could not stop Su Zimo's footsteps. Now that it was mocked by little Fatty, it was even more enraged and its attacks turned fiercer. After being chased by the crane the entire way, Su Zimo was already filled with anger. Seeing that the peak was just a step away from his head, Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and channeled the Anaconda Eclipse mental cultivation technique. He could not help but holler, "Lousy bird, take my saber." Clang! The sound of a sharp blade being unsheathed reverberated through the world. Su Zimo whipped out the cold moon saber on his waist and slashed upwards. Swash! A cold light flashed past. Alarmed, the crane could no longer be bothered to attack Su Zimo as it flapped its wings and fled. The crane had not expected Su Zimo to strike at all. More than that, it had not expected Su Zimo to strike at it. In Ethereal sect, no one dared to bully it. Even the patriarch of ethereal sect would dote on it, let alone the 5 peak masters. Initially, the task of knocking down those who came to join the sect into the 8 distresses formation was done by other cultivators of the sect. The crane felt that it was interesting and volunteered to do it. Initially, it was rather fun. It was excited to see people being chased into the 8 distresses formation one after another. But later on, it was no longer fun to meet this scholar with a bow and saber. A feather floated down slowly. Although the crane dodged in time, a feather was still sliced off by the cold moon saber. That scene had the 2 peak masters on the peak shuddering. They gripped their spirit weapons tightly and almost threw them out. That lad sure is gutsy. He even dares to bully little crane. If he joins the sect in the future, he's definitely going to suffer. When Xian and Xian looked at Su Zimo with a hint of pity. At that moment, Su Zimo did not know about it. After that slash, Su Zimo was in a great mood and laughed. Stupid little bird, you're still too inexperienced. Go back and cultivate for a few more years. Su Zimo threw the cold moon saber in reverse and stabbed it into the mountain wall. Leaping, he tapped his toes on the saber and continued ascending, using his toes to pull out the cold moon saber at the same time. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water without any sluggishness. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo was already at the peak. Su Zimo turned back to look at the crane that was still circling in midair and waved gently with a smile. Goodbye. The crane was still in its infancy. According to the age of the human race, it was only 7 or 8 years old and was at the age where it was playful and active. Now that it was slashed by Su Zimo, it felt aggrieved even though it was not injured. When it saw Su Zimo in such a state, the crane blinked its eyes and sobbed as it flew towards Misty Peak in a huff, crying endlessly. Caw, caw. Caw, caw. The cries of the crane reverberated through Misty Peak, alarming many people. Didn't little crane go to the front of the mountain to bully someone? Why does it seem like it's being bullied? In a palace on Elixir Peak, a young man with white hair and a youthful face was surprised. A cold woman walked out of the palace on Talisman Peak. Looking at the crane that was flying through the skies, she frowned slightly and muttered to herself, "What's wrong with little crane? Is there someone in ethereal sect who dares to bully it?" On Weapon Peak, an old man with disheveled hair and slovenly appearance popped out of nowhere and burst into laughter. It's rare to see little crane suffer. Interesting, interesting. Chapter 69. Su Zimo turned around and saw 4 people. He had seen the 2 Daoist children, one fat and one skinny. The other 2 middle-aged Daoist priests looked unfamiliar but had an extraordinary bearing. They looked at Su Zimo with a strange gaze. Su Zimo could vaguely guess that the 2 middle-aged Daoist priests might be seniors from Misty Peak. Su Zimo put down little fatty and looked around. He saw 8 huge flags around the 2 of them. Each flag was half the height of a person. The triangular flags had mysterious patterns drawn on them that fluttered in the wind. What are these? Su Zimo frowned and did not think too much about it. He adjusted his breathing and tidied his clothes before cupping his fists at the 2 middle-aged Daoist priests. Greetings, seniors. I'm Su Zimo from Yen Country. I was lucky enough to reach the peak, activate. Before Su Zimo could finish his sentence, he was interrupted by a voice. The 8 flags around Su Zimo and little fatty shone brightly. The patterns on the flags shone with a dazzling brilliance. In a trance, Su Zimo felt a sense of danger. He saw a middle-aged Daoist priest not far away suddenly wave his sleeves. An irresistible force came crashing down. The force was so vast that Su Zimo could not resist it at all. Su Zimo fell from the edge of the cliff and watched helplessly as the peak of the mountain got further and further away. His body was out of his control and he could not move at all. Fear rose in his heart. Boom! Su Zimo fell into the abyss and was smashed to pieces. Although his physical body was destroyed, Su Zimo's consciousness was still clear. Endless pain assaulted him. The pain of his muscles and bones breaking and his flesh exploding constantly stimulated Su Zimo. Why? Su Zimo did not understand. He did not have the mood to think about it. The pain that was everywhere was tormenting him. Su Zimo had never experienced the pain of impending death. There was great terror between life and death. This kind of terror was enough to make one collapse. Everyone was afraid of death. It was almost instinctive. Being pointed at by a knife would make one pale in fright. How terrifying would it be when death really came? On top of the mountain, Su Zimo and little Fatty were motionless. Their eyes were closed and their bodies were trembling. They did not fall into the abyss. The 8 distresses formation was activated, and the two of them were already completely immersed in the illusion. The formation that you personally set up is much more powerful than the 8 distresses formation in the abyss. Can these two little fellows withstand it? A trace of worry flashed across Wen Xian's eyes. Xian Yi said, "Let's wait and see. As long as these two can survive this tribulation, they will pass the test." At this moment, 3 figures appeared on the mountaintop. These 3 people had all passed the test of the 8 distresses grand formation in the abyss and passed the 2 tribulations of life and death. They were automatically teleported to the mountain top. The 3 of them were pale and sweating profusely. They sat on the ground powerlessly with blank expressions. The 2 Dao children hurriedly went forward and fed the 3 of them a pill. After the 3 of them swallowed the pills, their complexions relaxed slightly, and their faces gradually regained some color. The 2 little fellows with variant spirit roots are not bad. They've already passed 3 tribulations, Xian Yi suddenly said. Wen Xian sighed. Of the 8 distresses, the 4 tribulations of life, old age, sickness and death are considered easy. However, the remaining 4 tribulations are each more difficult than the last. Even if we form our cores, we might not be able to see through them, let alone them. The moment he said that, a gigantic flag waved gently and a blinding beam of light shot into the skies. Xian Yi heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. Not bad. This lad has already passed the death tribulation. A moment later, the haughty man and white-bloused woman were teleported to the peak of the mountain. Wen Xian looked at the 2 of them and smiled. Very good. You've passed 4 tribulations. Take a rest at the side. Swoosh! Another gigantic flag waved and a beam of light shot through the skies. They've passed through the pain of life so quickly. Xian Yi was shocked. Everyone had to go through the pain of life. However, they had all forgotten about it. In the womb, the fetus was curled into a ball. Its limbs could not be stretched and it could not breathe. It was equivalent to being in a small and sealed prison and was extremely painful. That was also the reason why babies would cry the moment they were born. Not long after, another beam of light tore through the clouds. Immediately after, a 4th beam of light shone. This, when Xian and Xian Yi exchanged glances and could see the shock in each other's eyes. From Elixir Peak, a young man with white hair and a youthful face soared into the air. Looking at the beam of light in the distance, he frowned and asked in confusion, "That beam of light is the 8 distresses formation flag. Someone is asking Xian Yi to set up the formation personally?" After a slight pause, the young man muttered to himself, "No, I've got to check it out." At the same time, figures flew out of Talisman and Weapon Peak respectively and sped towards the front of the mountain. Boom! A 5th beam of light appeared. Before long, a white-haired youth, a cold woman and an old man appeared on the peak of the mountain. All 5 peak masters were gathered. Swoosh! The flag waved. A 6th beam of light shone. He's already passed 6 of the 8 distresses. Such a temperament is extremely rare. What's the background of this lad? The white-haired youth asked with a grim expression. He's from Yen country. I don't know anything else, Wen Xian shook his head. The cold woman swept her gaze across Su Zimo and frowned slightly. Fire spirit root? That seems like it. However, the spirit testing gate didn't allow him to pass. I don't know why, but I'll test him with the spirit testing stone later on, Wen Xian replied. The moment he said that, boom! A seventh beam of light shone. Su Zimo had passed his seventh tribulation. Little Fatty had just passed the life and death tribulations and was so scared that he sprawled on the ground and bawled, still unable to extricate himself from the pain of the 8 distresses. In that short period of time, the 2 Dao children had already explained the entire process of the life and death tribulations to everyone. Initially, there were more than 500 people. But now, only 6 of them were left on the peak of the mountain. Apart from the haughty man, the white-bloused woman and Little Fatty, there were 3 mortals without spirit chi left. Everyone's gazes landed on Su Zimo with complicated expressions. They'd all just endured the tribulation of the 8 distresses, so they were naturally able to experience that sort of heart-burning and bone-piercing pain. None of them could imagine how torturous it was to go through all 7 types of pain. Xian Yi said in a deep voice, the 5th distresses of the 8th distresses are actually the stacking of the previous 7 distresses. It's not something that humans can endure. I'll dispel the formation so that the child doesn't get hurt. The moment he moved, the 8th beam of light shone. The 8 beams of light were incomparably resplendent above the mountain peak, illuminating half the skies. At the same time, Su Zimo opened his eyes with killing intent. Gripping his cold moon saber in reverse, he slashed forward. It was a peerless slash. In fact, the saber beam even overshadowed the 8 beams of light above the mountain peak. That slash was directed at Xian Yi with a chilling intent, causing the air above the mountain peak to plunge to freezing point. The 5 peak masters were shocked. That slash was way too sudden. His expression was unchanged as he extended his finger. Spirit light shone brightly on his fingertip as he tapped the cold moon saber gently. Clang! The cold moon saber was sent flying. Su Zimo shuddered and stumbled back a couple of steps. His feet slipped and he nearly fell from the mountain peak. Looking down at the abyss shrouded in clouds, Su Zimo gradually came to his senses and realized that just now, everything he was experiencing was just an illusion. The way the 5 peak masters looked at Su Zimo changed gradually. Chapter 70. What truly shocked the 5 peak masters wasn't that Su Zimo had survived the 8 distresses. It was Su Zimo's slash. As perfected Jin Dan, Wen Xian and the other 4 could sense that the power released from that slash had already surpassed the full strength of a perfected Qi refinement warrior. What sort of concept was that for a mortal to surpass a perfected Qi refinement warrior with just the burst of his physical body? It was proof that this man's body was comparable to spirit beasts and was even comparable to early-stage Foundation establishment spirit demons. Furthermore, Su Zimo's slash was way too murderous. There must be a lot of blood on his hands for him to be able to deliver that slash. How could a mortal be stained with so much blood? What shocked them even more was that Su Zimo had dared to strike at Xian Yi with such decisiveness. Su Zimo was only a mortal. As for perfected Jin Dan and the peak master of Array Peak, the fact that he could stand here meant that he was an immortal in the eyes of mortals. Su Zimo's slash had the intent to kill an immortal. Why did you attack me? Xian Yi glared at Su Zimo with bright eyes and asked in a deep voice. In that short period of time, Su Zimo had roughly guessed that just now, he had fallen into an illusion and everything he had experienced was nothing more than an illusion. Su Zimo lowered his head slightly. Just now, I mistakenly thought that Senior had attacked me and pushed me down the peak. That was the reason why I slashed. That answer was naturally within the expectations of the 5 peak masters as well. However, the more that was the case, the more the 5 of them felt troubled. This was an arrogant and unyielding man. It didn't matter if the other party was an immortal or had some sort of backing. If they offended him, he would kill them. In the eyes of the 5 of them, Su Zimo was like an unsheathed sword that could slice through metal like mud. Not only could he injure his enemies, he could even injure himself. It was hard to tell if it was a blessing or a curse for someone like him to join a sect. However, Su Zimo's temperament was hard to come by. His willpower was firm, and he had even endured the 8 distresses tribulation. Such a genius was hard to come by. If he were to miss out on the Misty Peak, he would be somewhat reluctant. What's more, Su Zimo had already passed the sect's 3 tests. The 5 peak masters looked at each other, unable to make up their minds. Logically speaking, Spirit Peak's Wen Xian would have accepted such a person as his disciple at the first opportunity. However, he did not say anything at this moment. After pondering for a moment, Wen Xian took out a spirit testing stone from his storage bag and handed it to Su Zimo. Test your spirit root again. Su Zimo held the spirit testing stone. The spirit testing stone glowed with a bright red light, emitting a trace of heat. The 5 peak masters nodded their heads after seeing this. Fire attribute, heavenly spirit root, that's right. Before the 5 of them could finish their thoughts, the spirit testing stone seemed to have caught on fire. In the blink of an eye, it turned into ashes and fell through the gaps between Su Zimo's fingers. Everyone was stunned on the spot. What was going on? The fat child was agitated as he pointed at Su Zimo. Peak Master, look! I was right, wasn't I? Even as perfected Jin Dan, the 5 peak masters had never seen anyone burn a spirit testing stone to ashes just for a spirit root test. Strange. Right then, an authoritative voice rang out in the minds of the 5 of them. This lad's killing intent is too strong and he's too sharp. Since he has a fire spirit root, we can let him join Weapon Peak and train him in weapon refinement. After that, we can make other plans. This was a voice transmission from the Patriarch of Misty Peak. Other than the 5 peak masters, no one else noticed it. Weapon Peak's peak master was the disheveled old man on the peak. The disheveled old man looked at Su Zimo and chuckled. Let's go. Follow me back to Weapon Peak. From now on, you'll be a trial disciple of Misty Peak and a member of Weapon Peak. All right. Su Zimo nodded. The haughty man, white-bloused woman and little fatty joined Spirit Peak naturally, while the remaining 3 mortals went to Elixir, Array and Talisman Peak respectively. Waving his greasy sleeves, the disheveled old man swept up Su Zimo and left the peak. Before long, Su Zimo was brought to Weapon Peak. The disheveled old man said, "From now on, I'll be your master. There aren't that many rules in Weapon Peak, so you can call me old man." Shui. Yes, you. Come here. The disheveled old man beckoned to a disciple who was passing by. The disciple called Shui was skinny and weak. Running over, he bowed to the disheveled old man and greeted respectfully, "Master. This is Su Zimo who has just joined the sect. He's your junior brother. Bring him to collect a sect badge and some items for trial disciples. Then, bring him to choose a cave abode." After saying that, the disheveled old man flicked his sleeves and left. "I'll have to trouble you then, senior brother." Su Zimo cupped his fists. Shui smiled and waved it off. "It's fine, you're welcome." Bringing Su Zimo to a majestic pavilion, Shui introduced, "This is the symbol of Weapon Peak, the Spirit Weapon Chamber. All trial disciples of the 5 peaks who want spirit weapons have to come here and exchange for them with contribution points. Contribution points are very important to the sect and can be used to exchange for spirit stones, elixirs, and things like cultivation techniques and secret manuals." "How do I get contribution points?" Su Zimo asked. "Within the 5 peaks, there's a mission steal. Every once in a while, missions will be updated and they'll all be rewarded with contribution points. Of course, the more difficult it is, the more contribution points you'll get." Bringing Su Zimo to the spirit weapon chamber, Shui bowed to the old guard and said, "Senior, this is a new disciple of Weapon Peak. He's here to collect a sect badge." "Oh, name?" The old gatekeeper opened his sleepy eyes and asked weakly. "Su Zimo." The old guard took out a long jade badge from his storage bag. One side of it was engraved with mysterious patterns while the other side was smooth and blank. Shooting out a stream of spirit chi from his fingertip, the old guard wrote 3 crooked words on the smooth side, "Su Zimo." Tossing it aside casually, the old guard closed his eyes and went back to sleep. Receiving the badge, Su Zimo looked at it carefully and found nothing special about it. Shui smiled. Junior brother, don't underestimate this sect badge. With it, you'll be able to enter and exit the sect freely. The fog outside won't be able to trap you either. Nodding his head, Su Zimo kept it carefully. Slapping his head, Shui seemed to have recalled something as he turned to the old guard and asked with a smile, Senior, didn't you leave something out? Without even opening his eyes, the old guard took out a storage bag and tossed it over. Receiving it, Shui handed it to Su Zimo and said, Junior brother, there's a spirit peering art and a chi condensation manual inside. Apart from that, there's also 10 inferior grade spirit stones. Keep them well. Knowing that Su Zimo had not condensed his chi, Shui opened the storage bag and took out the 2 books, placing them in Su Zimo's hands. Summoning his flying sword, Shui got Su Zimo to hop on and brought him to the waist of the mountain. Pointing at the rows of cave abodes, he said, We don't have many disciples in Weapon Peak and most of the cave abodes are empty. Junior brother, just pick one. At the thought that he still had to cultivate the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, Su Zimo chose a cave abode in a secluded corner and settled down at Misty Peak. Chapter 71. The cave abode was extremely spacious. After sitting quietly for a while, Su Zimo gradually calmed down from the joy of joining a sect. Imitating Shui, he hung the sect badge on his waist and took out the spirit peering art and chi condensation manual. The spirit peering art was the most basic cultivation technique in the cultivation world and almost every cultivator had cultivated it before. By circulating spirit chi in their eyes, they could detect the cultivation realms of other cultivators. Of course, there were also some extremely rare cultivation techniques in the cultivation world that could conceal one's cultivation from the spirit peering art. The Chi Condensation Manual was considered as an introductory cultivation technique of ethereal sect. If one wanted to open their storage bags, cultivate the spirit peering art, sword kinesis flight, refine elixirs and weapons, they had to cultivate spirit chi first. Su Zimo had a fire spirit root and the spirit chi he cultivated with the Chi Condensation Manual naturally carried a fire attribute. Before leaving, Shui told Su Zimo that there would be a grand entrance ceremony 10 days later in front of Ethereal Palace on the main peak of Misty Peak. Not only would many seniors of the sect be present, even the patriarch would be there. All the new disciples would have to attend as well. Su Zimo intended to cultivate a trace of spirit chi and reach level 1 chi condensation before the grand entrance ceremony. The thought of being able to fly on his sword once he condensed his chi without having to flee pathetically from cultivators made Su Zimo's blood boil. In fact, he even wanted to roar into the skies. Opening the Chi Condensation Manual slowly, lines of words entered his eyes as Su Zimo gradually immersed himself in it. The first step of the Chi Condensation Manual was to create a sense of chi. Spirit chi was omnipresent, just like breathing air. However, without a spirit root, one would not be able to sense the existence of spirit chi. According to the instructions of the Chi Condensation Manual, after 15 minutes, Su Zimo gradually sensed a scorching aura in the air that flowed around him. It was a fresh, unique and unprecedented feeling. So, this is spirit chi. Su Zimo's mind was in a state of shock. Suddenly, the sensation disappeared and he could no longer sense that scorching energy. This, Su Zimo's eyes flashed with a trace of confusion. After pondering for a while, he gradually understood. The first part of the Chi Condensation Manual was written with 4 words, calm the heart and condense the chi. Only with a calm heart could one feel the existence of spiritual energy. If one was distracted, this feeling would dissipate. No matter what, Su Zimo had already achieved the first step of the Chi Condensation technique, sensing chi. He could finally put down one of his worries. After all, the fire spiritual root in his body was indeed a little strange. Not only could it incinerate the spirit testing stone, it could even destroy the spirit testing gate at the entrance of the sect. Before this, Su Zimo had been a little worried about whether the acquired spiritual root would have the same effect as the natural spiritual root. Now, it seemed that his worries were unnecessary. The second step of Chi condensation was to draw Chi into the body. It wasn't enough to sense the spirit Chi. He had to control the spirit qi and guide it into his body. The third step of the qi condensation technique, qi entering the dantian. After drawing the spiritual qi into the body, one had to control the spiritual qi to sink into the dantian. Only in this way could one prevent the spiritual qi from dissipating in the body and becoming one's own spiritual qi. At this step, one would be at level 1 qi condensation. Su Zimo abandoned all distractions and calmed his heart. He tried his best to sense the spiritual qi in the air and gradually guided it into his body. All of a sudden, Su Zimo's right hand produced a warmth as a spiritual qi entered his body through his right hand. Interesting. The qi condensation technique did not state where the spiritual qi would enter the body. However, Su Zimo was still intrigued by the fact that the spiritual qi entered his body through his palm. When the spiritual qi entered his body, it was rather active and wandered around without listening to his commands. Su Zimo hurriedly controlled it and forced the spiritual qi into his dantian. The dantian was like a treasure trove in one's body. The moment the spiritual qi entered the dantian, it calmed down. Level 1 qi condensation. Su Zimo opened his eyes. There was a hint of excitement and disbelief in the depths of his eyes. Night had just fallen. In other words, Su Zimo had only cultivated for less than 2 hours. Su Zimo felt that it was surreal to be able to reach level 1 qi condensation in such a short period of time. Seems like a heaven spirit root is truly amazing. Su Zimo smiled. Su Zimo was in a good state after condensing his qi condensation. Without resting, he continued to cultivate and absorb spiritual qi towards level 2 qi condensation. His right hand was still warm as spiritual qi entered his body through his right hand continuously. Under Su Zimo's control, it gushed towards his dantian. Su Zimo was immersed in his cultivation. In the blink of an eye, a night had passed. Level 2 qi condensation. In just a single night, Su Zimo had reached level 2 qi condensation. Isn't this a little too fast? Could it be that the cultivation speed of a heaven spirit root is that fast? Su Zimo was stunned. After all, he did not know how fast others cultivated. He only had a vague feeling that it was abnormal for him to cultivate so quickly. After all, Su Zimo had not made use of spirit stones or elixirs for the entire night. If he were to absorb spirit stones and elixirs, wouldn't his cultivation speed be even faster? Su Zimo could not figure it out. He decided to put it aside for now and ask his senior brothers when he had the chance. At the thought of spirit stones, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Before leaving Pingyang town, Su Zimo had killed Zhou Dingyun and obtained a storage bag from him. Now that Su Zimo was at level 2 qi condensation, he could finally use a storage bag. Su Zimo took out Zhou Dingyun's storage bag from his chest. A trace of spirit qi seeped out from his fingertip and touched the storage bag gently. He opened the storage bag and a space appeared. There were more than 1,300 inferior-grade spirit stones and a jade bottle. There was nothing else. Su Zimo opened the jade bottle. There were 3 elixirs inside, emitting a faint fragrance. Smelling the fragrance of the elixirs, the spiritual qi in his dantian that was originally quiet became restless. Su Zimo understood that these 3 elixirs were definitely beneficial for the absorption of spiritual qi. For Su Zimo, who had just condensed his qi, this was a considerable amount of wealth. Su Zimo placed all the spirit stones and elixirs into the storage bag given to him by the sect. He also stuffed the sanguine crystal bow, cold moon saber and the quiver on his back into the storage bag. After removing the 1,000 kilogram weight, Su Zimo instantly felt relaxed. No matter how heavy the items were, he could not feel their weight in the storage bag. This was the magical part of the storage bag. Su Zimo activated the spirit peering art and started cultivating. In the following days, Su Zimo cultivated the qi condensation technique in the day and the marrow cleansing section of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness at night. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed. This was the day that the sect held the entrance ceremony for Su Zimo and the rest. Su Zimo tidied his clothes and leaped down from the stone bed. 10 days had passed and Su Zimo's cultivation realm had declined. Right now, he was back at level 1 Qi condensation. In reality, on the 7th day, Su Zimo's cultivation realm had already reached level 4 Qi condensation. There was a huge ball of spiritual Qi in his dantian that was as vast as the sea. Su Zimo suddenly recalled that Dai Yu had once told him that some geniuses among the cultivators would use spiritual Qi to temper their bodies while cultivating. For the next 3 days, Su Zimo used all the spiritual Qi in his body to temper his body. There was only a strand left in his dantian. Even though there was no progress in the marrow cleansing section, Su Zimo's body was much stronger than it was 10 days ago. Su Zimo estimated that even a level 10 perfected Qi refinement warrior with an inferior grade spirit weapon would not be able to hurt him. Chapter 72. Junior Brother Su, I'm Shui Yi. Are you in? A voice sounded from outside the cave abode. It was Senior Brother Shui Yi who had brought Su Zimo around Weapon Peak in the beginning. Su Zimo pushed open the door hurriedly and headed out. This time around, Su Zimo instinctively used his spirit-peering art to sense that Shui Yi was a level 9 Qi refinement warrior. Shui Yi looked at Su Zimo and his expression changed. Disbelief flashed through his eyes as he asked, Junior Brother Su, you're already at level 1 Qi condensation? Su Zimo could not understand what Shui Yi meant by that and nodded because he knew that he might slip up if he spoke too much. Wow, that's amazing! Shui Yi could not help but exclaim. Su Zimo was stunned. Was it amazing to be at level 1 Qi condensation in 10 days? If Su Zimo did not temper his body with spirit Qi, he would have been at level 5 Qi condensation by now. Su Zimo coughed gently and asked, Senior Brother, how long do others take to reach level 1 Qi condensation? That depends on the attribute of the spirit root. For example, I have an earth spirit root and it took me an entire month to reach level 1 Qi condensation. Among the first 3 steps of Qi condensation, sensing and drawing Qi into one's body are the most difficult. Beginners have a hard time grasping them as they either can't sense the presence of spirit Qi or can't draw it into their body. That requires a long period of cultivation, experimentation and exploration, Shui Yi explained. Although Su Zimo was expressionless on the surface, he was even more puzzled internally. Sensing and drawing Qi into his body were not difficult at all for him. How could it be as Shui Yi said? Could that be the benefit of having a heaven spirit root? At that thought, Su Zimo smiled. Perhaps it's because I have a heaven spirit root that I can cultivate faster. That's right. Shui Yi nodded in realization. It's indeed much easier for those with a heaven spirit root to cultivate Qi condensation. I heard that the fastest geniuses can reach level 1 Qi condensation in a single day. However, don't be discouraged, Junior Brother. Reaching level 1 Qi condensation in 10 days is already very fast. Su Zimo smiled and nodded. In reality, Su Zimo took less than 2 hours to reach level 1 Qi condensation. According to Shui Yi, even the genius with the fastest cultivation speed would need a day. How could this be? He thought about the explosion of the spirit testing gate, the incineration of the spirit testing stone, the terrifying cultivation speed, and all kinds of strange phenomena. The only explanation was that the celestial spiritual root that Dai Yu had planted in him was even stronger than the real celestial spiritual root. I won't be able to teach you in the future, so I helped you plant a spirit root. It won't be any worse than a celestial spirit root. In the future, you should find a sect to cultivate in. When Dai Yu had said this, she had sounded very casual, and even a little nonchalant. It was only now that Su Zimo realized how terrifying the spirit root that Dai Yu had planted for him was. Suddenly, Shui Yi frowned and asked in confusion, that's not right. Junior Brother, you have a heaven spirit root. Why would you join Weapon Peak? Shouldn't you join Spirit Peak instead? What's the difference? Su Zimo asked. There's a huge difference. Shui Yi chuckled. It's almost time for the sect entrance ceremony. I'll bring you there first. I'll tell you along the way. Summoning a flying sword, Shui called for Su Zimo and they sped towards Misty Peak. Along the way, Su Zimo found out from Shui that even though the 5 peaks had their own strengths, Spirit Peak was the strongest and had the most disciples, followed by Talisman Peak and Array Peak. The weakest were Elixir Peak and Weapon Peak. Spirit Peak specialized in combat and logically speaking, all those with celestial spiritual roots would join Spirit Peak. Be it elixir refinement or weapon refinement, there was an extremely high requirement for fire. However, Misty Peak was not proficient in controlling fire. Among the 5 major sects, True Fire Sect was the one with the deepest understanding of fire. The Great Zhou dynasty would hold a sect competition once every 10 years. All the sects in the dynasty would participate and set up 4 great rankings, namely the Spirit ranking, Artifact ranking, Alchemy ranking, and Talisman ranking. The top 10 of each ranking would be listed. With more than 100 sects and thousands of cultivators, they would definitely be the elites of their respective sections. Yet, only 40 people would be chosen. Not only was it a great honor to be able to leave one's name on the 4 lists, they would also be rewarded handsomely, proving that they were the true geniuses of the Great Zhou dynasty. In every sect competition, Ethereal Sect would take up the most spots on the Spirit ranking, followed by the Talisman ranking. However, no one had ever left their names on the Weapon and Elixir rankings. That was why Shui could not understand why Su Zimo was assigned to Weapon Peak even though he possessed a celestial spiritual root. Su Zimo could vaguely guess that there were 2 reasons. Firstly, he had damaged the sect's spirit testing gate. Secondly, he had once attacked Peak Master Xian Yi. Although this arrangement was meant to be a punishment, Su Zimo did not take it to heart. According to Shui, all the Qi refinement warriors in Ethereal Sect were trial disciples and could not freely enter Misty Peak, which was surrounded by the 5 peaks. Only by becoming a Foundation Establishment cultivator would one be considered an inner sect disciple of Misty Peak and have the chance to obtain middle-grade spirit weapons and better cultivation techniques. Given Su Zimo's cultivation speed, it would only take him a few years to become an inner sect disciple. Before long, Su Zimo and Shui arrived at Misty Peak. Not far away, a majestic palace stood, faintly discernible in the clouds. Above the palace, there was a plaque with 3 words written on it, Misty Palace. Shui led Su Zimo towards Ethereal Palace. By the side of the road, there was a crane statue standing on one leg with its eyes closed. It was 100 feet tall and had a massive body, exuding a dignified aura. The feathers on its body shone with a metallic luster, looking lifelike. Compared to this gigantic statue, Su Zimo and Shui were as tiny as ants. Looking at the statue, Su Zimo felt that it looked familiar. However, he did not think too much about it and merely praised from the bottom of his heart, "I wonder who made this statue. It's a work of the gods and looks exactly the same as a real crane." Sure. When he heard that, Shui's expression changed as he hurriedly gestured for Su Zimo to keep quiet. "What's wrong?" Su Zimo asked softly with an uneasy feeling in his heart. Shui wiped his sweat and said softly, "That's not a statue. That's the mystical guardian beast of Ethereal Sect. It's alive." "Alive?" Su Zimo coughed gently and looked up with an awkward expression. The crane stood there motionlessly and Su Zimo's first thought was that it was a statue. "What's it doing here then?" Su Zimo asked again. Shui shook his head and said, "I'm not sure either. Typically speaking, Senior Crane stays in Ethereal Palace and it's rare for ordinary disciples to get a chance to meet it. It seems like we're fated to meet today." Pausing for a moment, Shui looked around with a sneaky expression and whispered in a low voice, "However, I heard that Senior Crane's child was bullied by a new disciple some time ago and it was so angry that it cried. Perhaps it's here to find trouble with that disciple. I wonder which unlucky bastard it was, hehe." Suddenly, Su Zimo stopped in his tracks and turned around slowly. Blinking, he asked, "Is Senior Crane's child a crane as well?" "Isn't that obvious?" "Of course it is." Shui laughed. Su Zimo could not laugh anymore. Chapter 73. When Shui saw Su Zimo stop in his tracks with a strange expression, he asked softly, "Junior brother Su, what's wrong? You don't look too good." Su Zimo did not reply. As though he had thought of something, Shui gasped and pointed at Su Zimo with a trembling voice. "That unlucky brat. It can't be you, right?" Right then, Su Zimo felt a chill run down his spine and his scalp tingled. It was as though he was being targeted by an incomparably strong existence. Su Zimo's body stiffened and his limbs turned cold. Turning around slowly, he raised his head. Unknowingly, the gigantic crane not far behind them had opened its eyes and was looking over with a cold gaze. In front of the crane, Su Zimo felt incomparably insignificant, not only in terms of size, but also in terms of strength. If the crane wanted to kill him, it did not even have to make a move, a single thought was enough. The air around them seemed to have frozen and a murderous intent gradually spread, as though the world could collapse at any moment. All of a sudden, the crane spread its wings and soared into the skies, flying over Su Zimo and Shui's heads towards Ethereal Palace. Its gigantic wings covered almost half the skies as the wind howled and sand flew everywhere. In the blink of an eye, the crane disappeared into Ethereal Palace. In those few short breaths, Shui's face was pale and he was drenched in sweat, almost fainting from fright. Shui could not help but look toward Su Zimo. Su Zimo stood on the spot without a change in expression. The only difference was that his face was slightly pale and his eyes were indifferent. "Junior brother Su, aren't you afraid?" Shui could not help but ask. Su Zimo shook his head. "If Senior Crane wanted to kill me, it would have done so long ago. Why wait until now and even come to Ethereal Palace to wait for me?" "That's true," Shui panted slightly and nodded. Suddenly, Su Zimo asked, "What's Senior Crane's cultivation realm?" "I don't know, but its child is a spirit demon, equivalent to an early-stage Foundation establishment cultivator. Let me tell you, Senior Crane's child has an extraordinary bloodline. He's still in his infancy and has already reached early-stage Foundation establishment without cultivating much. If he grows up, he'll be incredible." Shui's words were also meant to remind Su Zimo to be careful in the future. Not long after, the haughty man, the white-clothed woman, Little Fatty, and the others arrived before the Misty Palace. Little Fatty's eyes lit up when he saw Su Zimo. He greeted him and ran over. "Not bad, big bro. You're already at Chi Condensation Level 1, said Little Fatty with a grin. The arrogant man and the lady in white glanced at Su Zimo. Their expressions were indifferent. To them, reaching the first level of Chi Condensation in 10 days was nothing special. Using his spirit-peering art, Su Zimo checked on the others. In 10 days, the arrogant man and the white-clothed woman had already broken through to level 6 Chi Condensation. Little Fatty was still at level 5 Chi Condensation. As for the other 3 trial disciples, none of them were at Chi Condensation yet. "I still don't know your name." Su Zimo started chatting with Little Fatty when he saw that the sect entrance ceremony had yet to begin. Little Fatty had a rare awkward expression as he chuckled dryly. "My surname is Pang and my name is Z." Su Zimo was stunned for a long time. Holding back his laughter, he praised, "Your name is like your person. What a good name." "Ha!" Little Fatty pointed to the arrogant man and whispered, "That arrogant fella is called Feng Haoyu and that ice beauty beside him is called Ling Ro. Big bro, have you noticed?" "Noticed what?" "Look, that fella's surname is Feng, meaning that he has a wind spirit root. That ice beauty's surname is Leng, meaning that she has an ice spirit root. I've already thought about it. My son won't have the surname Pang. He'll have the surname Lei, Guang, Dark and so on. He'll be born with a mutated spirit root. Hee, just thinking about it makes me happy." Su Zimo, in just a short while, many cultivators had gathered in front of Ethereal Palace. Most of them were Foundation establishment cultivators or inner sect disciples of Misty Peak. There were also some cultivators who soared into the air. They were clearly perfected Jin Dan. The 5 Peak Masters were among them as well. They stood in front of Ethereal Palace, leaving the middle seats empty. Before long, the sound of a bell rang from Ethereal Palace, reverberating through the 5 peaks and valleys. Accompanied by the sound of the bell, an old man in his 50s dressed in golden robes walked over slowly from Ethereal Palace. Standing at the entrance, he swept his gaze across Su Zimo's group of 7. For some reason, Su Zimo felt that the golden-robed old man's gaze seemed to linger on him for a while longer. "I'm the Patriarch of Misty Peak, Ling Yun." Even though Misty Peak is one of the 5 major sects of the Great Zhou dynasty, everyone should know that we're currently standing on Tianhuang mainland. It's divided into 4 regions, 3 seas, and 1 continent. The Great Zhou dynasty is only a dynasty in the north region of Tianhuang mainland. There are 3 other dynasties that are similar to it in terms of strength. Su Zimo's mouth was agape in shock. Back in Pingyang town, the Great Zhou dynasty was already something that he could only look up to. It was only now that Su Zimo realized that compared to the entire Tianhuang mainland, the Great Zhou dynasty and ethereal sect were nothing. If he were to continue staying in Pingyang town, he would be like a frog in a well, forever only able to see the palm-sized skies. Of course, given Su Zimo's current strength, he could not even roam freely within the borders of the Great Zhou dynasty, let alone 4 regions, 3 seas, and 1 continent. When he saw the shock in the eyes of Su Zimo and the others, the Patriarch of Misty Peak, Ling Yun, nodded and continued, "Among the 7 of you, some of you are already at level 6 Qi condensation while some of you have yet to do so. There's no need to feel discouraged if your cultivation is lagging behind. The path of cultivation is long and bumpy. Now that you guys have just started, it doesn't mean that you'll have a future just because you're lagging behind now. After Qi condensation is foundation establishment. After that is the major realm of cultivation, core formation. After forming a core, your lifespan will increase to 500 years and you'll shed your mortal body to become a perfected being. After core formation, there's the nascent soul realm where your lifespan will increase to 1,000 years. At nascent soul, you'll be known as a perfected lord. You'll be able to open up your spirit consciousness and cultivate your spirit consciousness. Even if you can't see, you'll be able to sense everything around you and your spirit consciousness will be all-pervasive, covering the entire world. After nascent soul is void reversion. After establishing your Tao heart, you'll be able to refine your spirit into the void. Your nascent soul will be cleansed of all impurities and undergo a qualitative change to form your essence spirit. Your essence spirit will be transparent and unafraid of the scorching sun. You'll be able to truly break free from the shackles of your physical body and roam the world with your spirit. It's equivalent to having an additional life and you can possess someone else's body and cultivate an external body with a lifespan of 5,000 years. At Void Reversion Realm, you'll be known as a Taoist. When he heard that, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. The mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness had a total of 9 sections. The 7th section was on core formation, the 8th section was on Yin spirit and the 9th section was on Yang spirit. The Yin spirit section said that one would be able to see the spirit after breaking through the voids. Was the word voids the spirit consciousness that Ling Yun mentioned? Did the Yin spirit correspond to the nascent soul of cultivation? The Yang spirit section said that one would be able to refine the dregs of the Yin spirit and obtain a pure Yang spirit without Yin. That would be the Yang spirit. In the later stages, one could even communicate with the power of heaven and earth and conjure a heaven and earth Dharma form. Did the Yang spirit correspond to the essence spirit of cultivation? Su Zimo lowered his head and tried his best to hide the shock in his eyes. If he cultivated both immortality and demonic, there was a high possibility that he would have 2 Jin Dan in the future and 2 essence spirits. Chapter 74. There's an even higher realm above the void reversion realm where you can summon clouds and rain with a flip of your hand. With a single thought, you can reverse the flow of rivers, burn the skies and boil the seas, shift the stars and travel thousands of miles with a single step. Those words had Su Zimo's group of 7 feeling emotional as they imagined themselves roaming the skies and looking down on the world. Who wouldn't yearn for such power? Many of the inner sect disciples present had already heard those words many times and they could still feel their blood boiling. The Patriarch of Misty Peak, Ling Yun, said in a deep voice, "Go back and cultivate well." At the end of every year, the sect will organize a face-off between the 5 peaks with great rewards. Even though the 7 of you have just joined the sect, be it in terms of spirit roots or potential, they are all excellent. I hope that some of you will be able to take part in this year's face-off and obtain a placing. On the way back to Weapon Peak, Su Zimo asked Shui, "What's the deal with the 5 peaks face-off?" Shui chuckled. In reality, it's to choose the number 1 of the 5 peaks. For example, the Weapon Peak face-off is a competition between disciples of Weapon Peak. The number 1 disciple can choose any inferior grade spirit weapon from the spirit weapon chamber. As for Elixir Peak, it's a competition of elixirs. The number 1 disciple can obtain a grade 1 elixir such as the Spirit Gathering Elixir. Frowning, Su Zimo asked, "If multiple disciples can refine inferior grade spirit weapons, how are they going to differentiate?" Huh. Shui burst into laughter. If a disciple can refine an inferior grade spirit weapon, he'll definitely be the number 1 of Weapon Peak. Junior brother Su, you haven't come into contact with weapon refinement yet, so it's extremely difficult for you to refine an inferior grade spirit weapon. I've never heard of any disciple being able to refine an inferior grade spirit weapon in the Weapon Peak face-off every year. Everyone would refine pseudo-spirit weapons and Master would judge which pseudo-spirit weapon is better. Su Zimo nodded. Shui continued, "Actually, the other 4 peaks are just a setup for the 5 peaks face-off. The one that everyone pays attention to the most is still Spirit Peaks face-off, where disciples fight in pairs and compete in terms of strength. That's what's interesting, and the rewards are the best. Not only will they be rewarded with an inferior grade spirit weapon, a grade 1 elixir, a grade 1 talisman and a number of spirit stones. Junior brother Su, don't think about these things. After all, regardless of whether it's alchemy or equipment refinement, both consume a great deal of energy and time. It's better not to neglect the essentials and focus on trifles. Calming down and cultivating is the right path." Su Zimo did not refute Shui's words, but he disapproved in his heart. After becoming an alchemist, one would be able to concoct pills, which would be beneficial to one's cultivation. After becoming a weapon refiner, one would be able to refine spirit artifacts, and it would also greatly increase one's strength. Most importantly, Su Zimo possessed the fire spiritual root. His cultivation speed was extremely fast, which would save him a lot of time. In the 5 peaks, there would be inner sect disciples coming to the 5 peaks every day to teach and clear their doubts. Su Zimo returned to Weapon Peak and listened carefully to an inner sect disciple's explanation on the art of weapon crafting before returning to his cave abode. The foundation of refining weapons was to first cultivate the spiritual fire. Spiritual fire was a flame that was ignited with spiritual energy as its foundation. There were 3 levels of spiritual fire, which were differentiated by color: light red, dark red, and crimson red. The darker the color, the higher the temperature of the flame. Naturally, it could refine more impurities in the equipment. Above the spiritual fire was the true fire, which was divided into light gold, dark gold and pure gold. The first step of weapon crafting was to choose the materials. Be it for elixir or weapon crafting, the materials used were all natural treasures that contained spiritual energy. The second step was smelting. Elixir refinement required a special furnace known as an elixir furnace. However, weapon crafting required a tripod known as a weapon tripod. Be it elixir furnaces or weapon tripods, they were made of special materials that were resistant to fire and would not melt. After placing the selected materials into the weapon tripod and smelting them with spirit fire, the materials would be melted into liquid form and fused together to refine the impurities in the materials. The third step was shaping. This step required one to control the temperature and lower it slowly. Before the molten metal in the weapon tripod solidified, one would have to shape the spirit weapon they wanted. Of course, if one were to craft some special weapons, this step would require even more effort. However, if it was an ordinary flying sword, it would be much simpler. The fourth step was tempering. The temperature was raised once more. Within the weapon tripod, one would make use of the impact of spirit chi and the roasting of flames to refine the impurities, making the spirit weapon even tougher. The fifth step was spirit gathering. Spirit gathering was the core of the entire weapon refinement process and was also the most difficult step. Within the weapon tripod, the spirit chi released by the melting of the materials was extremely pure under the continuous roasting of the spirit fire. The spirit chi had to be gathered on the spirit weapon once more and refined into it. A series of spirit patterns would appear on the spirit weapon. That was also the origin of the grades of spirit weapons. An inferior grade spirit weapon would be formed if it could form a single spirit pattern. A supreme grade spirit weapon would be formed if it could form 4 spirit patterns. The reason why spirit gathering was so difficult was because if it failed, the spirit weapon would explode in the tripod and all the previous effort would be for naught. Furthermore, the failure rate of spirit gathering was extremely high. The more spirit patterns one condensed, the higher the failure rate. The sixth step was tempering. This step was extremely simple. One had to place the spirit weapon in cold water for it to take shape. Su Zimo extended his left hand and channeled the spirit chi in his dantian, creating a weak flame in his palm. The flame was faint red and emitted a scorching temperature. However, his palm did not feel hot at all. Level 1 Spirit Fire. Su Zimo smiled. The spirit fire disappeared along with the dissipation of the spirit chi. Circulating his spirit chi, a flame appeared in his palm once more as Su Zimo practiced tirelessly. Suddenly, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he recalled something. Back in Pingyang town, perfected being Tsang Lang released a scarlet flame from his fingertip, burning Zhui Feng to ashes. It was only at this moment that Su Zimo realized that the flame was a level 3 spirit fire. At the thought of Zhui Feng's death, Su Zimo's eyes dimmed and he felt dejected as well. In terms of immortal cultivation, he had only just attained level 1 chi condensation. In terms of demonic cultivation, he had not made any progress in the marrow cleansing section even after such a long time. He did not know how long it would take for him to seek revenge for Zhui Feng. Dai Yu once said that the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness would get more difficult towards the end. Without her around, Su Zimo would not be able to master it. But now, Su Zimo was already stuck at the marrow cleansing section after the bone strengthening section, let alone the organs refinement and orifice clearing sections. Su Zimo fell into deep thought and a ball of spirit fire appeared in his right palm instinctively. Swoosh! A ball of flame rose and the scarlet flame was a little blinding. Shocked, Su Zimo swung his palm and dispersed the spirit chi along with the flame. The flame earlier on didn't seem to be faint red. Frowning, Su Zimo stared at his right palm and circulated his spirit chi, creating a spirit fire once more. Swoosh! The flame rose. The bright flame shone on Su Zimo's stunned face. Scarlet, level 3 spirit fire. Chapter 75. How could this be? Su Zimo stared at the scarlet flame in his right palm in deep thought. Of course, he did not think that he was exceptionally talented and managed to attain a level 3 spirit fire right after cultivating it. However, what was the reason for this to happen? Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Opening his left hand, he channeled spirit chi and conjured a flame in his palm. Swoosh! A faint red flame rose. Level 1 spirit fire. 2 balls of flames burned in Su Zimo's palms. However, their colors were completely different and the temperature they emitted was vastly different as well. Su Zimo retracted the flame in his palm and tried a few more times. Each time, the flame conjured in his left palm was a level 1 spirit fire. However, he could conjure a level 3 spirit fire in his right palm. Su Zimo recalled a detail from the beginning of chi condensation. The second step of chi condensation was to draw chi into the body. Back then, the spirit chi in the air entered his body through his right hand. What did that mean? Su Zimo frowned slightly and looked at his right hand repeatedly. However, he could not find anything amiss. After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo had no clue and buried that doubt in his heart. No matter what, it was not a bad thing to possess a level 3 spirit fire right after coming into contact with weapon refinement. The higher the level of the spirit fire, the better the effect of removing impurities when smelting spirit materials. Under normal circumstances, there was a high chance that a level 3 spirit fire could be used to refine middle-grade spirit weapons. Of course, for weapon refinement masters, the level of the spirit fire was only one of the most important aspects. One had to know how to control the spirit fire, temperature, heat and the core of spirit gathering. As long as a single mistake was made in any of the 6 steps of weapon refinement, it would be difficult to refine a middle-grade spirit weapon. For weapon refinement masters, those who could refine inferior-grade spirit weapons were elementary weapon refinement masters. Those who could refine middle-grade spirit weapons were intermediate weapon refinement masters. Only those who could refine superior-grade spirit weapons could be considered as advanced weapon refinement masters. Most perfected Jin Dan cultivators would only use superior-grade spirit weapons. Therefore, in the cultivation world, if one could become an advanced weapon refinement master, their status would be equivalent to Jin Dan cultivators. In fact, in terms of connections and reputation, they would be even wider than ordinary Jin Dan cultivators. As for the refinement of supreme-grade spirit weapons, the failure rate was too high. Even an advanced refiner would not dare to take it on lightly. For the rest of the time, Su Zimo received a weapon tripod from the old guard as a disciple of Weapon Peak. He spent most of his time in his cave abode practicing his weapon refinement techniques, occasionally cultivating his chi condensation to raise his cultivation realm. At night, he continued to study the marrow cleansing section. 1 month later, Su Zimo's cultivation had reached the 5th level of chi condensation, and he was quite proficient in the art of forging. He had successfully forged a few pseudo-spirit-grade flying swords, but he had made no progress with the marrow cleansing chapter. To be more precise, he didn't even have a clue. According to the marrow cleansing chapter, the sound of tigers and leopards would vibrate the marrow to achieve the effect of cleansing the marrow and exchanging the blood. Having lived in the Tsonglang mountain range for a year, Su Zimo was very familiar with the sounds of tigers and leopards. However, no matter how he imitated the roars of tigers and leopards, he could not achieve the effect of marrow cleansing. After a month, Su Zimo's throat was already hoarse from all the shouting. Su Zimo could vaguely sense that he might not have learned the correct direction. Therefore, he wanted to find a chance to catch a tiger or leopard to study the sounds of tigers and leopards. This day, Su Zimo walked out of his cave abode. At the end of every month, there would be a simple test among the 5 peaks. It wasn't compulsory and disciples of the various peaks were free to participate. The first place of the test would have a chance to observe the recordings left behind by the seniors of the sect during weapon refinement. Every weapon refinement master had a different method. The tempering step, especially, was carried out within the weapon tripod. It was the most secretive and would not be shown to others easily. For the past month, Su Zimo had many doubts. If he could observe the recordings left behind by the seniors of the sect during weapon refinement, it would be of great help to him. Before long, Su Zimo arrived at the weapon refinement hall of Weapon Peak on his flying sword. At a glance, there were more than 100 people. There were only dozens of trial disciples in Weapon Peak. Where did the others come from? Junior brother Su, you're here. Right then, Shui walked over from the side and greeted Su Zimo with a smile. Not bad. You're already at level 5 chi condensation. Shui praised before asking, why? Are you here for the end-of-month test as well? Yes, I want to give it a try, Su Zimo nodded. Alright, it's good that you're here too. Take a look at others' weapon refinement techniques and learn from them. Shui thought that Su Zimo was just here to join in the fun since he had just come into contact with weapon refinement. Senior brother Shui, there are only dozens of disciples in Weapon Peak. Why are there so many people for a single test? Su Zimo asked. Shui smiled. In the sect, disciples of the other 4 peaks who are interested in weapon refinement can come to Weapon Peak to listen to lectures, participate in the end-of-month test or even the 5 peaks face-off at the end of the year. After all, for some geniuses, they would choose to refine weapons, elixirs, talismans and formations while cultivating. Su Zimo nodded, that was what he thought as well. Su Zimo's gaze swept through the crowd casually before landing on a man in purple robes. The purple-robed man had a proud expression as he raised his head slightly with his eyes closed. Even if he was in the crowd, he could still be seen. This was the person who joined the sect at the same time as Su Zimo and possessed a variant wind spirit root, Feng Haoyu. After a month, Feng Haoyu had already advanced from level 6 Qi condensation to level 7. Shui followed Su Zimo's gaze and said, I heard that this person is hailed as the #1 genius of ethereal sect in the past 1,000 years. Coupled with his heaven-defying spirit root and extraordinary talent, many seniors of the sect have high hopes for him. I heard that he's going to take part in the 5 Peaks face-off at the end of the year and even declared that he's going to be #1 of 3 peaks. #1 of 3 peaks? Su Zimo furrowed his brows. Shui explained, even though he's a new disciple, he has a wind spirit root. Even if he's not at perfected level 10 by the end of the year, he'll definitely be a level 9 Qi refinement warrior. The only person who can compete with him in Spirit Peak is a woman called Ling Ro. I heard that she's a new disciple as well. Even if he can get #1 of Spirit Peak, what about the other 2 peaks? Su Zimo asked again. Shui lamented, one is Elixir Peak and the other is our Weapon Peak. Those 2 peaks are the weakest in the sect. Now that Feng Haoyu has appeared, it's a good thing for the sect. However, we're disciples of Weapon Peak after all. If he takes #1, we'll definitely feel uncomfortable. Su Zimo was puzzled and asked, Feng Haoyu has a wind spirit root. In terms of his control over fire, can he compare to disciples with fire spirit roots in Weapon Peak? Junior brother, do you know that no matter what type of spirit root one has, one can condense spirit fire? Shui asked. Su Zimo nodded. Even without a fire spirit root, one could still condense spirit fire. It was just that in terms of perception, cultivation and control over fire, it wouldn't be as easy and sharp as cultivators with fire spirit roots. Shui continued, that's what Feng Haoyu is relying on when his fire lends itself to the wind. Realization dawned on Su Zimo. Under the influence of the wind, the flames would naturally burn even more fiercely. Shui whispered again, I heard that Feng Haoyu has already cultivated a level 2 spirit fire. Su Zimo froze for a moment before looking at his right hand and nodding. That's pretty amazing. Chapter 76. It's not just pretty impressive, it's pretty impressive. Shui sighed softly. I've been in Ethereal Sect for 6 years and I've only just touched the edge of a level 2 spirit fire. Let's not talk about that anymore, Shui perked up and shrugged. If Feng Haoyu can truly achieve something in both elixir and weapon refinement and help Misty Peak leave their names on the elixir and weapon rankings of the sect competition, we'll be proud as well, right? Su Zimo smiled and nodded. Everyone, please be silent. Right then, a Foundation Establishment cultivator appeared at the front of the weapon refinement hall. Pressing down with both hands, the noise in the hall gradually disappeared. Everyone, please come forward and choose your materials before dispersing. Choose an empty spot in the hall and begin your weapon refinement. The test has officially begun. The 100 sect disciples dispersed one after another after selecting their spirit materials. Su Zimo and Shui chose a spot at the back of the hall. Hands behind his back, Feng Haoyu stood at the front with a prideful expression, no one dared to stand beside him. Prior to this, Feng Haoyu had already asked around and found out that none of the trial disciples of the 5 Peaks had managed to cultivate a level 2 spirit fire. The best of them had only just touched the edge of it. Feng Haoyu was confident that he would definitely be able to get #1 in the end-of-the-month test and obtain the right to watch the recordings left behind by the seniors of the sect. Boom! Taking out his weapon tripod from his storage bag, Feng Haoyu slammed it on the ground heavily, causing the entire hall to shake. Every single action of Feng Haoyu attracted everyone's attention. The 100-odd sect disciples participating in the test were not in a hurry to refine their weapons. After placing their weapon tripods, their gazes landed on Feng Haoyu. Feng Haoyu's lips curled slightly. Even though he did not turn around, he could sense the burning, jealous and envious gazes. Feng Haoyu enjoyed that feeling. The feeling of being the center of attention. Reaching out slowly, Feng Haoyu channeled his spirit qi. A ball of flame rose. It was a faint red level 1 spirit fire. The entire hall was silent as everyone watched the person at the front with bated breaths. Swoosh! Feng Haoyu extended his other hand and shot out a stream of spirit qi from his fingertip into the flames. With a whoosh, the flame in Feng Haoyu's palm burned brightly. Its color gradually darkened, and before long, it had completely turned dark red. Level 2 Spirit Fire. Whoosh! Even though many sect disciples had already heard about it, they were still shocked to see the level 2 spirit fire with their own eyes. The crowd was in an uproar. With a level 2 spirit fire, the success rate of refining low-grade spirit weapons would increase greatly. Many cultivators would never be able to touch it in their entire lives. Sensing the commotion in the crowd, a gleeful look flashed through Feng Haoyu's eyes. With a wave of his palm, the level 2 spirit fire floated to the weapon tripod and continued to burn. Warming the cauldron. First, he used the spirit fire to evenly heat the surroundings of the weapon crafting cauldron. After the temperature had spread throughout the entire cauldron, he placed the spiritual materials in. The process of weapon refinement was relatively long. At that moment, many cultivators behind Feng Haoyu had also begun to condense their spirit fires and proceed with the steps of warming the cauldron. Shui Yi looked at Su Zimo and said, "Junior brother Su, let's begin." "Alright," Su Zimo nodded. Shui Yi extended his palm and a ball of flame rose from it. Even though it was a level 1 spirit fire, its color was a little dark and it was showing signs of evolving into a level 2 spirit fire. The step of warming the cauldron did not require concentration. Shui Yi circled the spirit fire around the weapon tripod before placing it below. He turned to look at Su Zimo, thinking that this junior brother of his might be unfamiliar with weapon refinement since he had just come into contact with it. Perhaps, he could give him some pointers. The moment Shui Yi turned his head, he froze on the spot. There was a ball of flame burning in Su Zimo's palm that was so red that it was blinding. Shui Yi was completely dumbfounded and his mind went blank. He did not even notice that the flame beneath the weapon tripod before him was extinguished. Mimicking the others, Su Zimo burned the spirit fire around the weapon tripod before placing it beneath the tripod. The step of warming the cauldron was not mentioned in the explanations of the inner sect disciples in the past. For the past month, Su Zimo had not tried warming the cauldron even when he was in seclusion cultivation. "I didn't come for nothing this time round's test. Indeed, I gained something." Su Zimo was secretly delighted. Su, junior brother Su, your spiritual fire." Right then, Shui Yi's stuttering voice sounded in Su Zimo's ears with a hint of trembling. Su Zimo turned his head and smiled. "I was just lucky to cultivate a level 3 spirit fire in a daze." Su Zimo was not being humble. He truly cultivated it in a daze and did not know the reason why even now. Shui Yi's eyes widened and his mouth was agape, his jaw almost dropping to the ground. This was the first time he had heard that a level 3 spirit fire was cultivated in a daze through luck. Their voices were not loud, but the surrounding disciples could hear them clearly. Level 3 spirit fire? Dream on. The few disciples at the front turned back and were dumbfounded as well. A strange atmosphere gradually spread through the entire hall. Feng Haoyu, who was standing at the front, seemed to have sensed something as he frowned slightly. However, he did not turn back out of pride. In this hall, no one was worthy of his attention. Right then, a piercing shriek broke the strange atmosphere in the hall. Level 3 spirit fire. After that shriek, the hall was in an uproar. Scarlet. It's really a level 3 spirit fire. Who is that? He looks unfamiliar. Why haven't I seen him before? He seems to be a new disciple this year. This is unbelievable. He's only a level 5 Qi refinement warrior and yet he managed to cultivate a level 3 spirit fire. What sort of talent is that? When he heard the discussions behind him, Feng Haoyu's expression darkened. After standing still for a moment, Feng Haoyu's expression returned to normal. His eyes were calm as he turned around slowly and looked behind. That ball of crimson flame was the first thing that came into view. Right after, it was a familiar green robe and a handsome face. It's him again. Feng Haoyu narrowed his eyes as a cold glint flashed in the depths of his eyes. Su Zimo, who was initially warming the tripod, felt a sudden sense of enmity and looked up instinctively. What sharp senses! Feng Haoyu was secretly shocked. He had already concealed his enmity well. To think that it would still attract Su Zimo's attention. Their gazes met in midair. Feng Haoyu's expression was unchanged as he turned around arrogantly. On the surface, it seemed as though he did not take that to heart. However, the level 2 spirit fire beneath his weapon tripod was already extinguished. It was clear how shocked he was. Su Zimo smiled and did not think much about it. Seeing that the weapon tripod was already warm and he was about to place the selected materials in, a disheveled head suddenly appeared beside him. Shocked, Su Zimo retrieved the cold moon saber from his storage bag and almost slashed over. Greetings, Master. Greetings, Peak Master. When the disciples in the hall saw who it was, they greeted one after another. Su Zimo coughed gently and stuffed the cold moon saber back without a trace. Chapter 77. Unknowingly, Weapon Peak's master, the disheveled old man, had arrived at the weapon refinement hall and was standing beside Su Zimo. Glancing at the cold moon saber that Su Zimo had just returned, the disheveled old man asked in a seemingly casual manner, "Lad, why do you have to stab someone at the slightest disagreement?" When he entered the sect, Su Zimo had just exited the illusion on the peak of the front mountain when he slashed at Weapon Peak's master. Just now, he had nearly slashed at Weapon Peak's master's head once more. With an awkward expression, Su Zimo was about to retract his spirit fire and apologize to his master. Unexpectedly, the disheveled old man waved it off hurriedly and raised his head. "It's fine, continue refining. I'll watch from the side. Don't feel pressured." "All right," Su Zimo nodded in response. Pausing for a moment, the disheveled old man patted Su Zimo on the shoulder and said earnestly, "Lad, you don't have to be so tense in our ethereal sect. Relax, no one will harm you. Don't draw your saber for no reason." In reality, Su Zimo's reaction was something that he had trained in Songlang mountain range and was already a habit. Outside the mountain range, all the birds and beasts were Su Zimo's enemies. Back in the cave, he still had to be wary of the spirit monkey's sneak attacks, and that was why he was acting so jittery. However, Su Zimo did not let down his guard just because of the disheveled old man's words. While he should be more careful in the future and try not to draw his saber, he still had to be careful. The disheveled old man continued, "Furthermore, even if you draw your saber, you have to look at who you're dealing with. You've only been in the sect for a month and you've already drawn your saber on 2 peak masters. What will happen if you stay here for too long?" Cough, cough. "I'll be more careful in the future," Su Zimo smiled embarrassedly. None of the peak masters would appear for a test like this at the end of the month, let alone Weapon Peak's master who was known for his laziness. Now that the disheveled old man had appeared in the weapon refinement hall, everyone knew the reason. It was definitely not for Feng Haoyu, but for Su Zimo. At this moment, Feng Haoyu, who was standing at the front, felt his face burning. However, his back was facing the crowd, so no one could see the coldness in his eyes. Feng Haoyu calmed his mind and began to warm the cauldron again. At the back of the main hall, Su Zimo's level 3 spirit fire had never stopped. At this moment, he had already begun to put in the spiritual materials. Numerous spirit materials entered the cauldron. Su Zimo increased the circulation of his spirit chi and the flames blazed, enveloping the entire weapon cauldron in an instant. The temperature within the cauldron continued to rise. The step of smelting was to use high temperatures to melt all kinds of spirit materials into liquid form, and then fuse them together, refining the impurities in the spirit materials as much as possible. This step had nothing to do with artifact refinement techniques. It was the step that best reflected the difference in the level of the spirit fire. Even if it was a level 2 spirit fire controlled by a senior weapon refinement master, in terms of refining impurities, it would not be able to compare to a level 3 spirit fire controlled by a novice. Not long after, the various spiritual materials in the cauldron began to melt. In the end, they were refined into a large mass of liquid metal, releasing traces of spiritual energy. The level 3 spirit fire continued to burn. The mass of liquid metal bubbled within the cauldron and the spirit chi in the cauldron gradually thickened. When he saw that, a smile flashed through the disheveled old man's eyes as he nodded. The liquid metal was bright red and gradually shrank under the continuous roasting. That was because some of the impurities were being refined. 15 minutes later, the volume of the liquid metal finally stopped shrinking. This did not mean that there were no impurities in the liquid metal, it was merely the limit of what a level 3 spirit fire could refine. The smelting was over. At that moment, the spiritual materials in the weapon cauldrons of the other disciples had just melted. Feng Haoyu was the only one who was slightly faster, and a large mass of liquid metal appeared in his cauldron. Not only was the level 3 spirit fire more effective in refining impurities, it was also faster and was far ahead of others. The next step was forging. Su Zimo retracted his spirit fire and waited for the temperature in the cauldron to drop while regulating his breathing to recover the spirit chi that just now had expended. Forging required one to circulate their spirit chi and form a pair of spirit hands that would reach into the weapon cauldron. Before the liquid metals solidified, they would have to create the shape of the weapon they wanted. If they entered too early and the temperature in the cauldron was too high, not only would the spirit hands dissipate easily, it would be difficult for the forging to succeed before the liquid metal cooled down completely. However, if they entered too late and the liquid metal solidified completely, it would be even more impossible to forge. This step was a test of experience. After an incense stick's time, Su Zimo suddenly stood up and circulated his spirit chi furiously. Forming a pair of hands in midair, he reached into the weapon cauldron and grabbed the liquid metal. At that moment, the liquid metal was neither hard nor soft and had yet to solidify completely. The timing was perfect. The disheveled old man looked at the focused Su Zimo from the side and was increasingly satisfied. Bloody hell, I've really picked up a treasure. If not for the fact that there were so many sect disciples around, the disheveled old man would have hugged Su Zimo and kissed him fiercely. For some reason, Su Zimo suddenly felt a chill and could not help but shudder. A moment later, a flying sword was gradually formed. The sword was slender and did not have a sharp edge, the shape of the sword was just beginning to appear. At that moment, many disciples in the weapon refinement hall gave up on the test and focused on Su Zimo's weapon refinement process. When they noticed the sword shape that Su Zimo had created, the crowd could not help but hiss. At that moment, Feng Haoyu was already done with the smelting and was waiting for the weapon cauldron to cool down. Sitting on the spot, he could not help but turn back when he sensed the commotion in the crowd. When he saw the sword shape in Su Zimo's weapon cauldron, Feng Haoyu sneered and turned back. After the forging was done, Su Zimo could naturally sense the abnormality in the crowd. "Master, did I make a mistake?" Su Zimo could not help but ask. The disheveled old man waved it off and said nonchalantly, "It's not a big mistake. You grasped the timing of the forging very well. It's just that there's a problem with the sword shape. There's an additional hilt." "An additional hilt?" Su Zimo froze for a moment with a confused look in his eyes. The disheveled old man asked, "Do you know why most cultivators' flying swords don't come with a hilt?" Su Zimo shook his head. The disheveled old man said, "Flying swords are the most common Dharma treasures in the cultivation world. They have blades on both sides, are fast, agile and have a variety of attacks. Unlike ordinary swords, flying swords do not come with a hilt. With an additional hilt, the air resistance of the flying sword in the air will increase, reducing its agility and speed." A look of realization flashed through Su Zimo's eyes. In the past, when he cultivated as a demon, he had always been fighting in melee combat. Now that he had only been in contact with immortal cultivation for a month, he had barely practiced sword kinesis. After all, immortal cultivation was different from demonic cultivation. Cultivators did not use flying swords to fight their enemies. Instead, they used spirit chi to form a thread to control the flying sword from afar. In a fight, if the flying sword pierced the opponent, it would be stuck in the opponent's body if the hilt came with it. However, if there was no hilt, the flying sword could pierce through the opponent with ease and continue to be controlled without being affected. If the other party cultivated body tempering techniques and had a strong physique, the flying sword with a hilt would fall into the hands of the other party more easily. However, if the flying sword did not have a hilt and was all sharp, the opponent would not be able to grab it barehanded. For a flying sword, a hilt was only a burden. Chapter 78. The disheveled old man consoled, "That's just a small mistake. Just be more careful in the future. Don't be discouraged." Su Zimo nodded. No matter the outcome, his trip today was not in vain. Although the forging step seemed simple, there were many considerations in terms of the shape of the spirit weapon. One had to maximize the power of the weapon. Fourth step, tempering. The forged flying sword hovered in the weapon tripod and Su Zimo released his level 3 spirit fire once more to heat it up. For this step, the temperature had to be controlled well. It couldn't be too high or the flying sword would melt easily. It couldn't be too low either or it wouldn't be able to achieve the effect of tempering or sharpening. It was best to burn the spirit weapon to a scarlet and transparent state. For the past month, Su Zimo had failed countless times in the tempering step alone. A moment later, the flying sword gradually turned red in the weapon tripod. Under the continuous roasting of the flames, the sword shone with a crystalline red glow. Su Zimo controlled the flying sword and placed it at the bottom of the tripod. Conjuring a hammer with spirit chi, he began hammering on it. Clanging sounds rang out continuously. After tempering, not only could more impurities be removed, the sword would also become tougher. Among the 6 steps of weapon refinement, this step required the most skill and every weapon refinement master had a different tempering technique. Su Zimo merely hammered on the sword bit by bit with brute force. The disheveled old man frowned. Su Zimo's tempering technique was way too crude and was no different from the blacksmithing of the mortal world. At the same time, Feng Haoyu began tempering the flying sword as well. Unlike Su Zimo, Feng Haoyu's tempering technique was much more brilliant. Feng Haoyu had a wind spirit root and could conjure a wind hammer. As he hammered on the flying sword, he infused a trace of wind spirit chi into it. As such, the refined flying sword would be more agile and faster. As he hammered, the edge of the sword was gradually revealed. Feng Haoyu's tempering technique was clearly very proficient and his speed was even faster. He was already catching up to Su Zimo. After an incense stick's time, Su Zimo heaved a long sigh of relief. Tempering complete. If he wanted to forge a pseudo-spiritual weapon, he could directly put the red-hot flying sword into cold water and quench it. However, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Since the flying sword had a hilt, it wasn't perfect to begin with. Why not try spirit gathering? In the past month, Su Zimo had already destroyed dozens of flying swords in the spirit gathering step. None of them had been successful. According to some of the inner disciples who taught about smithing, there was no technique involved in spirit gathering. It was more like trying one's luck. If one was lucky, one would succeed in spirit gathering. Of course, this was under the premise that the first 4 steps were not too big of a problem. After the tempering, Su Zimo did not move the flying sword out of the weapon tripod. Instead, he stared at the spirit energy within the tripod with bright eyes. Could it be that he wants to gather spirit? If the spirit gathering succeeds, it will be incredible. He's only been in the art of refining for a month and he's already dreaming of gathering spirit energy. I think he doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. A series of discussions broke out around him. Some were shocked while some were mocking. Su Zimo tossed aside all distracting thoughts and calmed down. This was a step that required the full concentration of a weapon refinement master without any distractions. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo controlled the spirit energy within the tripod and slowly channeled it towards the scarlet flying sword. Under the constant pressure, a faint pattern appeared on the sword. It was faint and barely visible, as it had yet to truly take shape. Look, a spirit pattern. It's really a spirit pattern, but it's not formed yet. Could he really be able to create an inferior-grade flying sword? At that moment, Feng Haoyu had just finished his tempering as well. When he heard the discussions in the crowd, his heart sank as he glanced sideways at Su Zimo. If Su Zimo was truly able to create an inferior-grade spirit weapon, he could only take a gamble and attempt spirit gathering. However, Feng Haoyu was not confident. Spirit gathering was way too difficult and he had never succeeded before. The disheveled old man narrowed his eyes and stared fixedly at the flying sword within the tripod. His palms were sweating, he was even more nervous than Su Zimo. Piak! Right then, a crisp sound echoed from Su Zimo's weapon tripod. It's over. Su Zimo knew that things were bad. Immediately after, the flying sword exploded with a bang and the shard struck the weapon tripod with a loud bang. He had failed. That was to be expected. Su Zimo shook his head gently and laughed in a self-deprecating manner. The disheveled old man sighed gently. Shui looked regretful at the side as well. When Feng Haoyu saw that, he was finally relieved. Even though Su Zimo's flying sword had exploded, Feng Haoyu did not intend to attempt spirit gathering. Instead, he took out the pseudo-spirit weapon from the tripod and placed it in cold water. Sizzle! A thick white smoke rose from the basin. The flying sword was successfully refined and revealed a chilling aura that was extremely sharp. Feng Haoyu placed the flying sword on the table in front of him and waited for the final evaluation. Su Zimo had just put away the weapon tripod when he heard a voice in the hall. In the 6 steps of weapon refinement, the grade of spirit fire isn't the only thing. Don't think that you can become a weapon refinement master just because you've cultivated a level 3 spirit fire. Su Zimo turned towards the voice and met with Feng Haoyu's cold and provocative gaze. Feng Haoyu said with a fake smile, "Junior brother Su, you have to walk the path step by step with your feet on the ground. If you run without knowing how to walk, it's easy to fall." Su Zimo furrowed his brows slightly. The two of them had only met a few times and had never spoken to each other. Even though they did not have any grudges, for some reason, Feng Haoyu was extremely hostile towards him. Especially today. That's right. Well said, junior brother Feng. Fufu, you're getting cocky just because you've cultivated a level 3 spirit fire. That's called overestimating yourself. The people who spoke were not from Weapon Peak, but disciples of Spirit Peak who were here for the test. Naturally, they would not miss the opportunity to suppress Su Zimo and get into Feng Haoyu's good books. Cut the sarcasm. Go back and cultivate a level 3 spirit fire first. Shui could not help but stand out and scoff coldly. Many disciples of Spirit Peak were speechless as their expressions turned terrible. No matter what, even if Su Zimo failed in spirit gathering, it was a fact that he had cultivated a level 3 spirit fire and no one in the 5 peaks could compare to him. Feng Haoyu continued, "Junior brother Su, don't take this failure to heart. There's still the 5 peaks face-off at the end of the year. I hope that you'll be able to defeat me by then." Su Zimo looked at Feng Haoyu indifferently without replying. The disheveled old man watched everything from the side without saying anything. As a senior of the sect, he naturally would not interfere in a quarrel between disciples. After a while, the disciple in charge of the test declared, "Even though all of you have refined pseudo-spirit weapons, the flying swords refined by Feng Haoyu of Spirit Peak are of better quality and faster. Therefore, the number 1 of the end-of-the-month test is Feng Haoyu." Many disciples of Spirit Peak cheered. Feng Haoyu smiled gently and swept his gaze across Su Zimo before turning to the disheveled old man. Bowing slightly, he said, "Peak Master, please bring me to the images left behind by the seniors of the sect." "Yes." The disheveled old man nodded expressionlessly. "You're number 1, of course you're qualified." With that said, the disheveled old man tugged at Su Zimo's arm and said casually, "Let's go, lad. You can go take a look as well." Su Zimo froze for a moment. Frowning, Feng Haoyu said in a deep voice, Su Zimo failed in his weapon refinement and is not even ranked in the end-of-the-month test. He's not qualified to watch the images at all. Isn't this inappropriate, Peak Master? Indeed, it's inappropriate. The disheveled old man nodded in a serious manner before smirking. But, I'm happy to. Chapter 79. The disheveled old man's retort nearly caused Feng Haoyu to choke to death. This was clearly acting shamelessly and being unreasonable. Coupled with the fact that he was the master of Weapon Peak, no matter how indignant Feng Haoyu was, he could not say anything and could only swallow his anger. Under the envious gazes of the disciples, the disheveled old man led Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu into the inner hall. The inner hall wasn't big and was only dozens of square meters. There were about 1,000 jade scrolls hung on the four walls. Among them, only about 100 of them were shiny while most of them were dim. The disheveled old man pointed to the jade scrolls on the wall. These are the images left behind by all the weapon refinement masters since the establishment of Misty Peak. The 100-odd jade scrolls contain images of successful spirit weapons while the rest are images of failures. However, they were all created by weapon refinement masters as well. The two of you can choose 10 of them to view. Although there seemed to be a lot of jade scrolls, Ethereal Sect had been around for thousands of years. However, there were only 1,000 jade scrolls left behind and most of them were images of failures. Without thinking much, Feng Haoyu chose 10 shiny jade scrolls right away. Those were all images of successful spirit weapon refinements. After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo chose 5 bright and 5 dim jade scrolls. To Su Zimo, while there were benefits to being successful, there were also benefits to being able to view the images of weapon refinement masters' failures. At the very least, he could avoid making similar mistakes. When he saw that, the disheveled old man nodded to himself. It was difficult for a weapon refinement master to replicate the success of others. However, they could avoid similar failures. That was a form of wisdom. Holding the 10 jade scrolls, Su Zimo assumed a lotus position and injected spirit chi into them. The patterns on the scrolls shone brightly as a clear image entered his vision. Immersed in it, Su Zimo's understanding of weapon refinement deepened and many of the doubts in his heart were resolved. In the blink of an eye, a day and night passed. Feng Haoyu stood up and returned the 10 jade scrolls. Glancing at Su Zimo, who was still comprehending, he left the weapon refinement hall. Before long, Su Zimo stood up and returned the jade scrolls as well. How was it? You've gained quite a bit, right? The disheveled old man asked with a smile. Su Zimo nodded and pondered for a moment before asking, I do have some insights for the first 4 steps of weapon refinement. However, I still don't know how to do it for spirit gathering. The difficulty of spirit gathering is in spirit chi. Initially, the spirit chi within the materials are relatively stable. However, after fusion and refinement, the structure of the flying sword is formed will be refined. It's as difficult as ascending the heavens if you want to infuse the spirit chi back into the flying sword. In addition, the flying sword has been burned to a crimson state. If there is any conflict, it will immediately explode. The disheveled old man sighed softly. Sigh, you're not the only one. Even advanced weapon refinement masters wouldn't dare to claim a 100% success rate for spirit gathering. Most of it is a kind of spiritual perception that has been cultivated through years of refining artifacts. When Su, the disheveled old chi, is spirit? Through the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness and his life and death experiences, Su Zimo had already cultivated a spirit perception. However, could it be used for spirit gathering? Su Zimo's mind was stirred as he pondered about how he should put in more effort in that direction. Head back first. If you have any questions, you can look for me here at any time. With that said, the disheveled old man pointed to the jade scrolls on the wall and winked at Su Zimo. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he understood the disheveled old man's intentions. The disheveled old man was hinting to Su Zimo that if he were to look for him here, he could naturally take the opportunity to look at the jade scrolls on the wall. Thank you, Master, Su Zimo's heart warmed as he bowed. The moment he walked out of the weapon refinement hall, Su Zimo caught sight of someone at the entrance. Feng Haoyu. It was as though he had been waiting for a long time. Su Zimo frowned slightly. Just as he was about to summon his flying sword and return to his cave abode, Feng Haoyu turned around slowly and raised his head, reaching out to block Su Zimo's path. What's the matter? Su Zimo was annoyed at the way this person's nose was pointed at the sky. Feng Haoyu replied indifferently, at the end of this year, I want to create history in Ethereal Sect by pointing my sword at the number 1 of the 3 peaks, including Weapon Peak. Junior brother Su, you're someone who understands the situation and should know what to do. I really don't know, Su Zimo shook his head expressionlessly. Are you challenging me? Feng Haoyu narrowed his eyes and released the spirit chi of level 7 chi condensation, causing a cold gust of wind to blow around him. You're sick. Su Zimo scoffed coldly and soared into the air on his flying sword. In the blink of an eye, he left the weapon refinement hall and disappeared from Feng Haoyu's sight. After returning to his cave abode, Su Zimo sat on his bed and slowly digested the contents of the 10 jade scrolls. Before long, there was a series of hurried knocks on the door. Bro, it's me. Little Fatty's voice sounded. After not seeing him for a month, Little Fatty had also cultivated to level 6 chi condensation. The cultivation speed of a heaven spirit root was truly shocking. Before the end of the year, Feng Haoyu, Ling Ro, and Little Fatty could all reach level 9 chi condensation or even perfected chi condensation. Bro, I heard that you have a feud with Feng Haoyu. Little Fatty asked right away. Su Zimo asked, you know about this too? It's not just me. This matter has already spread throughout the 5 peaks and many disciples are discussing it, Little Fatty sighed. Bro, you're being a little irrational. He cultivates his and I cultivate mine. What's the difference? Su Zimo did not mind and chuckled casually. It's not that simple. Little Fatty continued, in the sect, disciples are forbidden from killing each other. Even if he challenges you, you can reject him. But it's different outside of the sect. Bro, you can't possibly stay in the sect forever, right? Most of the sect missions require you to head out. Now that Feng Haoyu has gathered many disciples around him, he'll definitely find trouble with you the moment you head out of the sect. Su Zimo raised his brow and did not say anything. Little Fatty continued, actually, given Feng Haoyu's potential, he'll definitely succeed in establishing his foundation after the 5 peaks face off at the end of the year and be promoted to an inner sect disciple. Bro, you can completely avoid him this time round and take part in the 5 peaks face off next year. That way, you'll be doing him a favor. We'll talk about that later. Su Zimo did not express any opinion. Little Fatty nodded. No matter what, I'm on your side, bro. If there's anything you can use me for, feel free to let me know. Alright, Su Zimo smiled. The two of them chatted for a while more before Little Fatty left. Su Zimo stood silently in his cave abode for a while, intending to leave the sect and head down the mountain. Su Zimo was a little anxious after making no progress in the marrow cleansing section for the past month. Back when he was cultivating the bovine-tongued saber, Su Zimo had comprehended the essence of it through the scene of a yellow cow eating grass. After leaving the sect this time round, Su Zimo intended to catch a tiger or leopard in the forest near the sect to study them carefully. Chapter 80. Ever since he entered the sect, Su Zimo had not left the sect nor had he taken on any missions. Now that he was going to leave the sect, Su Zimo intended to take on a mission and complete it so that he could earn some contribution points for the sect as well. Arriving at the mission stele of Weapon Peak, Su Zimo raised his head and looked over. The mission stele was split into 2 sections. The upper section was for the missions of the 5 peaks and disciples of the 5 peaks could accept them. The lower section was for Weapon Peak disciples and was specially designed for them. The higher the difficulty of the missions, the more contribution points they would be rewarded. Great Rock Forest. It was a place dozens of miles northwest of Misty Peak where pure gold ore was produced. It was an important spirit material for refining flying swords. The mission to search for the spirit material wasn't too difficult. However, the location of the mission was in Great Rock Forest and the difficulty increased exponentially. In fact, it was quite dangerous as well. As long as it was a forest, there would definitely be birds and beasts. At the periphery of the forest, there were mostly wild beasts or weak spirit beasts. However, the deeper one went into the forest, the stronger the spirit beasts would be. In fact, there might even be spirit demons in the core region. Once targeted by a spirit demon, even Foundation establishment cultivators would not dare to escape unscathed. And this pure gold ore mine was located in the core region of Great Rock Forest. This was a mission of Weapon Peak and it had been on the mission steal for some time now without anyone daring to take it on. Great Rock Forest was the closest forest to Ethereal's sect. Initially, Su Zimo had intended to head there as well and thus took on the mission. There was a sleepy old man next to the mission submission desk. Su Zimo found out from Shui that this was one of the 3 elders of Weapon Peak, Elder Lu. The 3 elders of Weapon Peak were the disheveled old man, the gatekeeper of the spirit weapon chamber, Elder Li, and this Elder Lu. In order to be conferred the title of Elder in Misty Peak, one had to be at the level of Jean Dan. Su Zimo came before Elder Lu and handed over his sect badge. Raising his head, Elder Lu frowned and tossed Su Zimo's sect badge back casually, barking coldly, "You're not allowed to go." "Why?" Su Zimo asked. Elder Lu rolled his strange eyes and said, "Kid, are you stupid? You're only at the 5th level of chi condensation. Are you going to the Great Rock Forest to die? Even perfected chi refinement warriors have to team up for this mission. I'm just going to take a look. If there's any danger, I'll definitely leave." Su Zimo smiled. In truth, even though Great Rock Forest was dangerous, it was not too difficult for Su Zimo who possessed spirit perception. "If you really encounter danger, do you think you can run away?" Elder Lu curled his lips and said, "Look at your small body. Let me tell you, don't blame me for not warning you if you die outside. Elder, don't worry. I'm a tough guy. I won't die." Su Zimo smiled. Elder Lu harumphed coldly and made a record. The mission on the mission steal dimmed, indicating that it had been accepted. Pondering for a moment, Elder Lu took out an intricate paper crane from his storage bag and handed it to Su Zimo. "This is the spirit messenger crane of the sect. If you encounter any danger, you can release this spirit crane." "Thank you, Elder." Su Zimo kept the spirit crane in his storage bag and cupped his fists before leaving Weapon Peak on his sword. Elder Lu closed his eyes and fell asleep again, muttering, "Juniors these days sure don't know their place." This was the first time Su Zimo left the sect after a month in the sect. Su Zimo took out the paper crane that Elder Lu gave him and took a look. Su Zimo had seen a paper crane as such once before. Back in the capital of Yen country, Su Zimo was chasing after the one-armed cultivator of Joyful Sect. That person had released a similar paper crane to send news back to the sect. There were mysterious patterns etched on the paper crane and it could be activated by injecting spirit chi. Su Zimo could vaguely guess that the paper crane was actually a type of talisman. Keeping the paper crane, Su Zimo suddenly felt something and frowned. Someone was following him. Su Zimo scoffed coldly internally. If someone was following him the moment he left the sect, there was no doubt that it was an ethereal sect disciple. Could little fatty have been right? Is he trying to cause trouble for me outside? Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he pretended not to notice anything and continued speeding in the direction of Great Rock Forest. Before long, Su Zimo arrived at the edge of Great Rock Forest. Along the way, Su Zimo could vaguely sense that there were 5 people following him and the highest cultivation was even at level 9 chi condensation. If these people were really sent by Feng Haoyu, he's truly taking me seriously. Su Zimo smiled and burrowed into the forest without hesitation. Entering the forest was akin to returning to Su Zimo's territory. Here, no one was a match for Su Zimo. Su Zimo retracted his flying sword and sprinted left and right. Before long, he shook off the people behind him and arrived at a secluded spot. Taking off his green robes, he was topless. A series of crackling sounds could be heard from Su Zimo's body as his tendons and bones rang together. Instantly, he grew to a height of more than 2 meters. His flesh expanded and his muscles intertwined as his body expanded as well. The muscles on Su Zimo's face twitched and changed strangely. A moment later, his appearance changed drastically and he turned into a bare-chested burly man with a ferocious expression. After mastering the first 3 sections of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, Su Zimo could change his appearance at will such that even his closest kin would not be able to recognize him. Su Zimo lowered his head and chuckled. In a flash, he disappeared from the spot once more. Senior brother Zhou, where did Su Zimo go? Why did we lose him all of a sudden? If you ask me, we should have made a move earlier on. Where are we going to find that lad in Great Rock Forest? Shut up. Zhou Wei's expression darkened as he scolded softly, we were too close to the sect earlier on. How could we make a move? If the disciples of the sect saw us, we'll be punished when we return. Zhou Wei was a trial disciple of Spirit Peak and was at level 9 Qi condensation. Initially, he was quite a figure in Spirit Peak. Unexpectedly, Feng Haoyu with a mutated spirit root and heaven-defying potential defeated him at level 7 Qi condensation. Zhou Wei was completely subdued by Feng Haoyu's strength. Even though Zhou Wei was the one who made the decision for this operation, it was with Feng Haoyu's tacit approval. Other than Zhou Wei, who was at level 9 Qi condensation, 2 of the other 4 were at level 7 and 8, that was enough to teach Su Zimo a lesson. Let's search carefully. Su Zimo is only at level 5 Qi condensation, so he can't have gone far. He's definitely at the periphery of Great Rock Forest, Zhou Wei analyzed calmly. A Spirit Peak disciple asked, what if that lad ran into Great Rock Forest? That's great. That lad can't blame us if he gets eaten by the spirit beasts, Zhou Wei scoffed coldly. Another Spirit Peak disciple asked, if we find Su Zimo, how are we going to deal with him? A cold glint flashed through Zhou Wei's eyes as he replied sinisterly, between sect disciples, we can't cripple one another's cultivation. However, we can severely injure that lad so badly that he won't be able to get out of bed for a year. That way, he won't be able to participate in the Weapon Peak face-off at the end of the year. Chapter 81. On a towering ancient tree not far away, a burly man with a bare upper body was hidden in the thick leaves, overhearing the conversation between Zhou Wei and the rest clearly. A cold glint flashed through the burly man's eyes. A gust of wind blew past, and the leaves rustled. The strong man slid down from the ancient tree. His movements were light, and he silently landed on the ground. He crouched down and used both his hands and feet to push through the grass, moving stealthily in the direction of Zhou Wei and the others. The grass that was half a man's height hid the burly man's figure perfectly. Looking down, one would only feel the grass and trees swaying gently as though a gust of wind had blown past. A thin line glided on the ground, it was impossible to tell that it was a person. Senior brother Zhou, shall we split up and search? I think so too. That Su Zimo is only at level 5 Qi condensation. Any one of us can capture him easily. Zhou Wei nodded. Let's do that. Everyone, split up and search. What are you guys looking for? The moment Zhou Wei said that, a hoarse voice with a hint of coldness sounded from behind him. For Qi refinement warriors, unless absolutely necessary, they would not fly too far even if they used sword kinesis flight, at most 2 to 3 meters. The higher the distance, the more spirit Qi they would expend. At that moment, behind Zhou Wei, a burly man with a bare upper body stood up. He was more than 2 meters tall and his muscles were as hard as rocks, filled with explosive power. It was as though a deity had suddenly descended with a murderous expression. Instantly, Zhou Wei was scared out of his wits. He did not realize that someone was approaching him. Suddenly, the burly man reached out and grabbed Zhou Wei's ankle, dragging him down. Right in front of the 4 Spirit Peak disciples, he slammed him onto the ground. Bang! There was a deafening sound. A human-shaped pit appeared on the ground. Zhou Wei, who was at level 9 qi condensation, was like a 3-year-old baby in the hands of the burly man, unable to retaliate at all. Zhou Wei lay paralyzed in the huge pit, spitting out blood foam from his mouth. His eyes were rolled back, and half of the bones in his body were broken. His internal organs were shaken, and he fainted on the spot. Only his body was still twitching unconsciously. The burly man knocked Zhou Wei unconscious. In a flash, he appeared in front of the other 2 level 8 Qi refinement warriors. The 2 disciples of Spirit Peak were startled. Without hesitation, they wanted to leap into the air. But unexpectedly, the burly man's speed was even faster. With a leap, he directly pulled the 2 of them down from the air. Boom! Boom! It was the same scene again. The 2 Spirit Peak disciples were thrown to the ground by the burly man and fainted on the spot. Quick! The remaining 2 disciples of Spirit Peak were pale as they summoned their flying swords and pointed at the burly man. Their flying swords turned into a streak of light and arrived instantly. One of the flying swords pierced the muscular man's glabella while the other pierced the muscular man's chest. They were both vital points. The burly man grinned maliciously. He didn't even try to dodge. Instead, he charged forward. When they saw that, the 2 Spirit Peak disciples heaved a sigh of relief. In the end, this mysterious burly man's spiritual wisdom had yet to be developed. He only had brute force, but he did not know the power of cultivation techniques. He did not even know how to dodge the flying sword. Clang! Clang! Close in, the flying sword struck the burly man's glabella and chest. The sound of metal clashing could be heard. The flying swords were repelled. Unharmed, the burly man charged forward to the 2 of them instead. Monster! One of the Spirit Peak disciples was so scared that his voice was trembling and his face was pale. In fact, he had even forgotten to escape. The other Spirit Peak disciple hurriedly controlled the flying sword beneath his feet to turn and flee. With a casual punch, the burly man sent the Spirit Peak disciple who was rooted to the spot flying. Sprinting on the ground, his legs crisscrossed, leaving afterimages as he caught up to the Spirit Peak disciple in a few steps. With a leap, the burly man leaped back and forth on a few towering ancient trees, increasing his height continuously. Come on down! The burly man burst into laughter and grabbed the person's calf, pulling him down from the skies. Snap! The person's calf was snapped on the spot by the burly man's grip. Ah! 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 The person was in so much pain that he broke out in cold sweat and howled. Carrying the person, the burly man returned to his original spot and grabbed the remaining 4 people who had fainted. Carrying 3 in one hand and 2 in the other, he sprinted outside in huge strides. Who are you? We're disciples of Ethereal Sect. How dare you attack us? If the sect finds out about this, they won't let you off easily. The only disciple who was conscious was Guochong as he yelled at the burly man. The burly man did not say anything and merely continued to travel through the forest. Increasingly afraid, Guochong asked with a trembling voice, Where are you taking us? Hero, please let us go. Hero, I know my mistake. Suddenly, the burly man stopped in his tracks and lowered his head. Glaring at Guochong coldly, he asked coldly, What did you do wrong? Guochong was stunned by the question. He had merely blurted it out in a moment of desperation and did not know what he did wrong. Guochong lamented internally. He did not know where this burly man came from, but he attacked without saying anything and was so strong that it was unreasonable. Their cultivation methods were completely useless against this burly man. After stopping in his tracks, the burly man tossed the 5 of them on the ground casually and turned to leave without saying anything. A look of disbelief appeared on Guochong's face. They survived? The burly man did not kill them. Guochong looked around. This was outside Great Rock Forest. For some reason, the burly man brought them out of Great Rock Forest and tossed them here casually before leaving just like that. May I know your name and which sect are you from, burly man? Guo was indignant as he shouted once more. Stopping in his tracks, the burly man suddenly turned around and returned. Shuddering, Guo wanted to slap himself a few times as he hurriedly said, "Hero, I know my mistake this time round. I shouldn't have asked for your name." The burly man walked up to Guo and the others and grabbed their storage bags. Opening them, he took out the spirit stones and elixirs inside and put them all into his own storage bag. Looking at his storage bag that was almost emptied, Guo wanted to cry but no tears came out. Snickering, the burly man turned and charged into Great Rock Forest, disappearing in the blink of an eye. With trembling hands, Guo opened his storage bag slowly and took out a paper crane. Using his spirit chi, he wrote on it, "We were attacked in Great Rock Forest. The enemy is strong and has a mysterious identity. Please send reinforcements to the sect." Injecting spirit chi, the spirit crane flapped its wings and flew, turning into a streak of light that disappeared into the void. Right now, he was injured and could not bring the four of them back. As such, he could only wait here for reinforcements from the sect. Looking at his four fellow sect mates who were still unconscious, Guo was filled with sorrow. At the thought of how his savings over the past few years were swept clean by this mysterious burly man who appeared out of nowhere, Guo could not help but howl, "I'm innocent." Chapter 82. The mysterious burly man was naturally Su Zimo. Returning to Great Rock Forest, Su Zimo reverted to his original appearance and figure. Donning his green robes once more and returning to his scholarly appearance, he sped towards the center of Great Rock Forest on his flying sword. The reason why Su Zimo chose to change his appearance was also a decision he made after careful consideration. Although Zhou Wei and the other four were here to cause trouble for Su Zimo, it was difficult to explain things when they returned to the sect. If the five of them denied it, there was nothing he could do. If he severely injured the five of them, Su Zimo would be punished more easily. On the other hand, his melee combat strength was Su Zimo's trump card and he did not want to expose it prematurely. Furthermore, only by changing his appearance and identity would he be able to smoothly loot all the spirit stones and elixirs in the five people's storage bags. No matter how wrong the five of them felt, they had no one to complain to. That was because there was no such person as the mysterious burly man in this world. Gradually entering the center of the forest, Su Zimo retracted his flying sword and landed on the ground. Danger was everywhere in the forest. Su Zimo's flying sword was not as agile as on the ground after all. If he encountered any danger, he could avoid it immediately. Along the way, Su Zimo sensed the auras of many spirit beasts. However, Su Zimo did not fight with those spirit beasts. Instead, he tried his best to avoid them and headed straight for the center of Great Rock Forest. Not far away, there was a small stone forest. Pieces of pure gold ores were erected on the ground and shone brightly. Su Zimo snuck over carefully. Within the stone forest, Su Zimo sensed a dangerous aura. There must be an extremely strong spirit beast or a spirit demon residing here. In the center of the stone forest, beside a gigantic pure gold ore, a spirit beast covered in thick armor sprawled on the ground. Its armor shone with a cold metallic luster and its thick tail was filled with spikes. Its head and limbs were covered in armor as well. A metal-devouring beast. It survived by devouring all sorts of spirit materials and ores. It had a cold temperament and was invulnerable to weapons. It was extremely strong and had almost no weaknesses. The metal-devouring beast before him was clearly about to cultivate to the realm of a spirit demon. It was a little tricky. Su Zimo frowned. If it was any other spirit beast, Su Zimo was confident that he could kill it. However, he had no idea how to deal with the metal-devouring beast. At this time, the sleeping metal-devouring beast suddenly opened its eyes. Its cold gaze fell on Su Zimo, bursting with killing intent. Roar! Suddenly, the metal-devouring beast stood up and roared in Su Zimo's direction, charging over. Su Zimo squinted his eyes and a cold glint flickered in his eyes. He exerted strength in his legs and executed the plow heaven stride. With a stomp, 2 gullies appeared on the ground and the soil was overturned. In the face of the metal-devouring beast's attack, Su Zimo did not retreat or evade. Instead, his aura increased. After Plow Heaven Stride, he used Mountain Lean and pushed his entire body forward. Bang! A man and a beast crashed into each other. Su Zimo took half a step back, while metal-devouring beast was sent flying. It only stopped after smashing through several pieces of gold. Huh! Su Zimo laughed heartily. At this moment, Su Zimo realized that his physique had reached an extremely terrifying level after being tempered by spirit chi on the basis of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. Even the strength of the metal-devouring beast could not withstand his attack. A trace of panic flashed in the eyes of the metal-devouring beast. Su Zimo executed Divine Steed Fleeting and appeared in front of the metal-devouring beast in an instant. He drew the cold moon saber from his storage bag and slashed at the metal-devouring beast's head. Clang! Sparks flew. The cold moon saber was deflected and the metal-devouring beast was unharmed. At the same time, the metal-devouring beast swung its thick tail that was covered with barbs and swept it across the air. It hit Su Zimo squarely in the chest. In a flash, Su Zimo executed the mental cultivation technique of petrification of flesh and blood. His flesh expanded and became as hard as stone. Bang! Su Zimo fell and slammed heavily into the largest pure gold rock in the middle of the stone forest. Dense cracks appeared on the pure gold rock behind him. The metal-devouring beast looked at the pure gold rock behind Su Zimo with a nervous expression. Su Zimo rubbed his chest and returned the cold moon saber to his storage bag. The cold moon saber was useless against the metal-devouring beast. He could only rely on his physical strength to kill it here. The man and beast clashed once more. The metal-devouring beast opened its bloody mouth and bit toward Su Zimo's neck. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged. Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed the metal-devouring beast's upper and lower jaw, pulling it outwards with all his might. Psst! Su Zimo took a deep breath. Like an anaconda eating the sun, his chest puffed up and his arms expanded. Green veins popped on his arms and they crawled all over his arms like green snakes. It was a shocking sight. Open up! Su Zimo growled and tore with both hands. Shing! A blood mist filled the air as organs fell out and the stench of blood filled the air. The metal-devouring beast was torn into two by Su Zimo. Panting slightly, Su Zimo tossed the corpse of the metal-devouring beast to the ground and started collecting the pure gold rocks on the ground. Su Zimo's eyes lit up. A large piece of pure gold crystal appeared from the pile of shattered pure gold rocks. It was almost transparent and shone with a mysterious luster. Pure gold crystal! Su Zimo exclaimed. Pure gold crystal was a supreme-grade pure gold rock. It was extremely difficult to produce and was also an important material for forging middle-grade or even superior-grade spirit weapons. It was extremely rare. I've struck gold this time. Su Zimo's heart was burning with excitement as he hurriedly kept the pure gold crystal that was taller than a person into his storage bag. Su Zimo smashed all the other pure gold rocks but he did not find any more. Even so, Su Zimo's gains from this trip had far exceeded his expectations. After collecting all the pure gold rocks, Su Zimo turned and left. Before long, a green-robed scholar appeared from Great Rock Forest with a linghu in his left hand and a spirit leopard in his right. At the same time, Guochang's spirit crane for help returned to Spirit Peak, causing quite a commotion. An elder of Spirit Peak personally led a group of inner sect disciples to Great Rock Forest. Weapon Peak. Bored, the disheveled old man was strolling around the peak. Arriving beside the mission stele, he raised his head and exclaimed softly, "Someone took the mission for Great Rock Forest? Which disciple of our Weapon Peak is so capable to head to Great Rock Forest?" Beside the stele, Elder Lu squinted his sleepy eyes and harumphed. "There's a level 5 chi condensation lad who doesn't know his place and ran off on his own. I was afraid that something would happen to him so I even gave him a spirit crane." Level 5 Chi Condensation. Frowning, the disheveled old man seemed to have recalled something as he grabbed Elder Lu's wrist and asked, "What's that lad's name?" "I think he's called Su Zimo or something." "Piak." The disheveled old man slammed his palm on the table heavily, scaring Elder Lu awake instantly. "Are you crazy? Why are you so flustered?" Elder Lu glared and scolded. "You're the one who's F*King crazy." The disheveled old man hollered, "That lad is the only person in Weapon Peak who managed to cultivate a level 3 spirit fire. How dare you let him head to Great Rock Forest? I'll F*King kill you. He's the lad who managed to cultivate a level 3 spirit fire." Elder Lu was dumbfounded as well. The disheveled old man's face darkened as he hollered, "Sleep, sleep, sleep. All you know is to F*King sleep. That lad is the hope of Weapon Peak. If anything happens to him, I'll never let you off." Stunned for a moment, Elder Lu soared into the air hurriedly and urged, "Stop wasting time. Hurry to Great Rock Forest and save that lad." You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.